Hey guys! Tonight we slip past the velvet curtains of time into a world where the air is thick with orange blossom and shadows fall like secrets across palace walls. We're headed to the Abbasid Caliphate, yes, the golden age of silk science and suspiciously poetic politics. You're barefoot, of course. The stone floor cools your souls as you move deeper into the palace, guided by nothing but the flickering oil lamps and the hush of the night. There's laughter far behind you, some noble's feast echoing in a distant chamber. But here near the Eastern Garden it's only crickets and that strange, hypnotic silence old buildings hum when everyone else is asleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And if you're tuning in from somewhere unique, let us know where you are and what time it is. Right now, we love seeing how far this little night journey traveled.
Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch slightly as you slip under a woven arch. You know this path now through the jasmine grove, past the shallow pond where turtles do nothing in particular. It's not meant for you, not officially, but neither is it locked. A secret garden that pretends not to be hiding. The scent hits you first. Gardenias heavy with dew, lemon trees with overripe fruit, and that note beneath everything warm, unmistakable ambergris from the prince's cloak hanging forgotten on a low branch. He's here already. You move slowly now, not wanting to startle him. He always sits the same way under the tall pomegranate tree knees, drawn up cloak draped more like a blanket than royal garb. He's tracing something into the dirt with a twig. Poetry, probably. He's that kind of prince.
Historians still argue whether this garden actually existed. Some say it's symbolic, like a metaphor for inner peace or unconsummated love. But let's pretend it's real, that you're really here, ducking under moon-glow vines to find the Caliph's son playing poet under the stars. He looks up, smiles. He doesn't seem surprised to see you. You're late, he murmurs, though there's no actual schedule. Time bends in the garden. You sit beside him on the low stone ledge, worn smooth from years of secret conversations. A frog plops into the water, scandalized by your presence. The prince gestures toward the dirt, where he's written something in swooping Arabic letters. I tried to rhyme partridge with moonlight, he says, half defeated. I think I've just invented a new form of humiliation. You laugh even though the joke's terrible. That's the point. From somewhere far off, the sound of a ney flute floats over the walls, sweet, reedy, haunting. The kind of music that makes you feel nostalgic for places you've never been. He leans back, cloak falling open to reveal ink stains on his cuffs, of course. He's been at the calligraphy desk again. The Caliph wants him to focus on military treaties and taxation codes. But the son prefers metaphors, especially ones involving birds longing and storm-tossed ships. There are so many storm-tossed ships in his poems. Here's a mainstream historical fact to settle us. In the Abbasid palaces, especially those in Baghdad, weren't just political hubs. They were cultural beacons. Libraries larger than most cities, astronomers, poets, doctors, and people who somehow managed to be all three at once. The Caliph's court was both a battlefield and a salon, and yes, some of its princes were terrible at swordplay, but brilliant with metaphors. Tonight he tells you about a dream, a recurring one, a girl with silver-threaded veils standing under a fig tree, reciting verses that wake him up with tears he won't admit to. You tease him. Ask if the girl looked like someone he's seen in the palace, maybe in the kitchens, maybe the laundry courtyard. He smirks but doesn't deny it. Maybe Samarkand, he says quietly. She smelled like sandalwood and spoke like every word cost her a coin. This is not a boy in love, not yet. But he's on the edge of something, the kind of emotional cliff where one misplaced compliment could send him plummeting into ballads. You reach into your robe and pull out a small paper packet dried rose hips. You'd saved them from the kitchens earlier, swiping them from the spice bin. You offer it like treasure, and he accepts it as such. Do you think love is real? He asks, suddenly, serious now. Not joking. You pause. A moth flutters past your ear, frantic with moonlight. The water in the pond ripples from a lazy carp, brushing against a lily stem. You answer the only way you can, real like frogs or real like dreams. He considers that, maybe both. Both sound inconvenient. You lean back against the stone shoulder, brushing his, not romantic, not yet, but present. Real. Like frogs, like dreams. The garden hums around you. If you squint, the stars overhead seem to move in calligraphic swirls, tracing unseen verses across the sky. Before you leave, he hands you a folded scrap of parchment. Tell me if this one works, he says. I tried rhyming heart with startled bird. Again? You pocket it without reading. You'll save it for later. Something to read by candlelight when the palace feels too big and the walls too quiet. As you rise to go, he doesn't stop you, just nods, as if to say we'll meet again, probably somewhere equally inconvenient. The night closes in like a velvet curtain, and somewhere in a far wing of the palace the Caliph dreams of battle maps and succession laws, unaware that in his own garden a very different sort of rebellion is beginning. You wake early, the stone floor cold beneath your feet as you tiptoe past dozing guards weaving through hallways that always smell faintly of dates and history. The city is just beginning to stretch and yawn, bakers lighting their fires, muezzins clearing their throats. But you've got a different destination in mind. The harem courtyard is quieter than you expect. Not lifeless, just hushed, like it's holding its breath. You're not here on duty. Technically, you're not supposed to be here at all. But a friend in the kitchen heard a whisper from a cousin in the stables who swore he saw her arrive yesterday, covered in travel dust, eyes like dry thunderclouds and dressed in the bright silks of somewhere much farther east than Baghdad. You move slowly past the marble fountain where the water sounds suspiciously like gossip. A parrot mutters half a verse from a love song, then goes silent when it sees you. Even the birds here have secrets. She's there, sitting cross-legged beneath the cypress tree, braiding her hair without urgency, as though being watched is simply part of her routine. Which it probably is, the girl from Samarkand. They say she was bought in the caravanserai outside the city by a merchant who couldn't afford to keep her, but knew the Caliph paid well for rare acquisitions, a girl who could sing in 5 dialects and recite medical texts when she wasn't dancing, a girl with almond-shaped eyes and a refusal to be impressive on cue. She sees you, doesn't stand, doesn't smile, just meets your gaze like a challenge, like she's measuring your purpose here. You offer a nod, respectful, but not subservient. You're not important enough to command and not foolish enough to flatter. She resumes braiding. If you've come to stare, she says, without looking up, you'll need a better excuse than curiosity. You chuckle, caught. Curiosity is the excuse. The better one would involve a tray of sweets. She snorts. Then go find one. She speaks with a soft accent, Turkic maybe, but filtered through Persian vowels. Samarkand was like that, a soup of languages, all spice and swirl. You've never been, of course, but you've read the travelogues. Cities made of blue tile and promise markets louder than mosques and wind that always smells like pomegranates and camels. Mainstream historical fact, Samarkand during the early Abbasid period was a vital hub on the Silk Road. Traders, scholars, slaves and diplomats all passed through its gates. Cultures collided there in ways that left perfumes lingering centuries later. If someone in Baghdad was described as from Samarkand, it usually meant exotic, expensive, and more than a little inconvenient for anyone hoping for quiet compliance. She stands now shaking out her skirt. Dust rises in polite clouds around her. She is younger than you guessed, but not naive. Her movements are measured slow, like someone who learned a long time ago that rushing only draws attention. She wears red, but not in a way that asks for compliments, more like a warning. There's a fringe tidbit whispered in the palace kitchens. Girls from Samarkand were trained to speak in poetic code to test the intelligence of those around them. Ask one what time it is and she might answer with a metaphor about the moon's mood. Ask her name and she'll reply with a proverb. It sounds like nonsense until you realize it's not. You sit on the low marble bench and ask, "What brought you here?" She raises one eyebrow. A very expensive mistake, apparently. You laugh again. The girl is sharp. Too sharp, maybe. Not what the Caliph usually prefers. But perhaps that's why the prince will notice her. You're not the only one who's already noticed. Behind the columns you catch a flash of silks and hear the unmistakable shush of eunuch sandals. The harem has eyes, always. Still the girl doesn't hide. She stretches one arm overhead like a cat in the sun, then murmurs, "Is it true the Caliph's son writes love poems to birds?" You blink. Where did you hear that? She smiles, finally. Birds talk. Historians still argue whether this particular woman ever existed. Some chronicles name her Layla, others Aluna or Nargis. One scroll describes her as a gift from the eastern wind, which is wildly unhelpful unless you're writing your own bad poetry. Most agree she was purchased as a slave, but rose quickly through wit, not looks alone. Some even claim she was once a spy, though for whom no one agrees. You realize something as she steps closer, shadow falling across your knees. She's not afraid. Not of the guards or the prince or you. Whatever her past, it built something inside her that can't be bought or sold. She reaches out, suddenly tugging gently at a thread on your robe. "This one's loose," she murmurs. "Might want to fix that before someone important sees." You glance down. Sure enough, a gold thread dangling near your hem. You hadn't even noticed. But she did. You offer a quiet thanks. She shrugs, like it didn't matter, but you both know it did. The sun is higher now, casting longer shadows across the courtyard tiles. You should leave before someone wonders why you're here. Before she becomes a problem simply for being too interesting. As you rise, she says softly, "Tell your prince I braid my hair with 3 strands, one for memory, one for warning, and one for spite." You pause, turn to ask what that means, but she's already walked away. The parrots resume their gossip. You find him in the scriptorium hunched over his desk like a monk who just realized asceticism doesn't come with back support. The room smells of old leather rosewater and somehow burnt almonds. Again, he doesn't look up when you enter. His fingers are stained the deep indigo of crushed lapis, and his inkwell appears to have suffered a small tragedy. There's a smear on his cheek that suggests he scratched an itch mid-sentence and kept writing anyway. The Caliph's son, heir to 1,000 years of Rule 39 riding instructors and exactly zero interest in statecraft. His calligraphy, on the other hand, is, well, let's just say, if the Abbasid dynasty ever crumbles, at least the poetry will be legible. Do you ever sleep, you ask, stepping over a spilled parchment roll? He grunts in response, possibly a greeting, possibly the sound of a vowel giving up halfway through a metaphor. He's working on another scroll, golden reeds forming letters so precise they look carved. You peer over his shoulder. It's a love poem, of course, possibly directed at the concept of longing itself, since it includes no names but a great many sighs. You're smudging the verse, you point out. He glances down at the ink running sideways across the last line. Maybe that's what heartbreak looks like. You snort. It looks like poor technique. Mainstream historical fact incoming Abbasid Baghdad was a haven for the arts. Calligraphy in particular was considered a divine art. Writing the words of God required beauty, precision, and a steady hand. So naturally the prince, more obsessed with verses than victory, is at home among scrolls, reed pens, and ink pots. Still, you can't help noticing his handwriting falters around certain words. Softness, belonging, eyes. The same words that start turning up more often since the girl from Samarkand arrived. You pluck a finished scroll from the drying rack and skim a few lines. She walked as if chased by memory. She spoke like cinnamon in winter. She braided her hair with defiance. You raise an eyebrow. You met her. He pretends not to hear you, though the corner of his mouth twitches.
Have you seen her? She saw me first. He finally looks up. There's that flicker again, half pride, half panic. She's clever, you nod, and observant, possibly armed with metaphorical daggers. Perfect, he murmurs almost to himself. Exactly the kind of trouble that deserves a sonnet. There's an open scholarly debate about how much power Abbasid princes really had. Some historians say they were glorified figureheads until the Caliph died. Others argue that younger sons often wielded subtle power through cultural influence, founding schools, patronizing artists, or in one notable case reforming falconry to be more aesthetically pleasing. It's not always about swords. Sometimes the quill draws sharper lines. The prince dips his pen again, this time hesitating. You see his eyes drift toward a small satchel on the desk, its flap slightly ajar. Inside is a folded scarf, red with a single gold thread. The same one the girl wore beneath the cypress tree.
She left this, he says softly, not explaining how he came to possess it. You study him for a moment. Ink-stained fingers, smudged cuffs, eyes rimmed with the kind of fatigue that poetry feeds on. He's not in love? Not yet. But the gravity has him. That slow tug towards something he doesn't know how to ask for. You're not subtle, you offer, he shrugs. Neither is longing. There's a fringe tidbit you recall now. Some caliphs in the Abbasid court were known to write under pen names in literary salons. They competed anonymously against their own scribes and scholars, sometimes losing intentionally just to hear what the people really thought. The prince has tried this trick before. Last year he submitted a poem under the name The 10th Pomegranate. It ranked 4th. He's never forgiven the judges. Are you going to talk to her, you ask? He shakes his head. Better to be anonymous a little longer. I want her to meet the words first. You roll your eyes.
And what if she thinks you're a pompous dreamer with no sense of rhythm? He grins. Then she's already halfway to understanding me. There's something oddly brave about his awkwardness. He has no plan, no strategy, just a hope that words might do what rank and riches never could invite someone to look at him, not past him. As the morning sun filters through the lattice windows, he sets down his pen and reads aloud the last stanza. His voice is soft, unsure, but honest. And if I write your name in silence, may silence answer me in ink. You don't say anything. But you hand him a fresh parchment sheet and a cleaner reed pen. Try again, you say, gently. You're close. Later that evening, the palace shimmers like a dream wrapped in gold. Every corner is lit with lanterns, glass globes painted in blues, greens, and soft amber hues dangling like stars that decided to come a little closer for the night. The annual lantern parade has begun.
It's a celebration held on the first full moon after the spring winds arrive. A festival born of superstition and beauty in equal parts. Officially, it honors the Caliph's ancestors. Unofficially, it's an excuse to eat too much light things on fire and wear clothes you'd normally reserve for your funeral or wedding, whichever comes first. You're trailing behind a pair of musicians playing something jaunty on oud and tambourine weaving between dancing children and silk-swathed nobles. The air smells of honey, roasted almonds, and the rare peace that only festivals bring. And there, just beyond the crowd, beneath a string of paper lanterns shaped like fish, he sees her. The girl from Samarkand. She's standing at the edge of the celebration, slightly apart, holding a lantern in both hands, as though uncertain what she's meant to do with it. The flickering candle inside throws shadows up her face, turning her expression into something ancient and unknowable. The Caliph's son freezes mid-step. His robe catches on someone's sandal. He mutters an apology, barely noticing. His gaze is fixed like a falcon sighting its prey, though in this case the falcon is shy and slightly ink-stained, and the prey has opinions and zero patience for dramatics. You sidle up beside him. There's your poem, you murmur. He hushes you without looking away. Mainstream historical fact lantern festivals were common throughout the Islamic Golden Age, especially in Baghdad, where the blending of Persian and Arab traditions brought vibrant public displays. They were communal events, markets stayed open, late families gathered in gardens, and the palace often held private versions for the elite. It was a good time to be visible or invisible, depending on your intentions. The prince takes a breath, steps forward, then realizing he's forgotten how to use his legs, takes another slightly more dignified step. She notices him, of course. Everyone does. His presence hums with royal weight, even when he's trying to pretend otherwise. But she doesn't bow. She doesn't even lower her lantern. Instead, she says calmly, "Your cloak is inside out." He freezes, looks down. It is. You cough to hide your laughter. Somewhere in the distance, a child releases a paper lantern. Into the air, it rises like a jellyfish made of fire. The prince smiles sheepishly and corrects his cloak. "You noticed. I notice many things," she replies. "That's what people like me are trained to do. People like you." He echoes, voice careful. She tilts her head. People who weren't born into rooms lined with books and fruit. It's not bitter, just true. Historians still argue whether this conversation really happened, if the Caliph's son ever spoke to her so openly during the festival, or if their first meeting came later wrapped in more propriety. But the best stories ignore such concerns. "I'm glad you're here," he says, finally, a little too sincerely. She eyes him. "I didn't have much say in the matter." He winces, but not defensively. "That's fair." Another lantern floats overhead, this one shaped like a phoenix. Its flame flickers in the soft breeze, momentarily lighting her profile like the curve of a new moon. "I heard you can sing," he says. "I heard you can write," she counters. "You first." She lifts her lantern slightly. "Not here. Not for people who ask." He grins. "Then I'll have to earn it." You're standing just close enough to catch the quick glance she gives him, curious, measuring, but not entirely closed. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shifts her weight toward him. Just slightly. A gesture so small it could be wind. Fringe tidbit. In some circles of the Abbasid elite, subtle body language was considered a language of its own. Entire romances were conducted through glances, finger gestures, and the folding of veils. There were handbooks, actual manuals on how to tilt your chin to suggest disapproval or affection. Courtiers studied them like battle tactics. Love, after all, could be a duel. Suddenly a loud whoosh erupts behind the courtyard wall. Fire breathers. The crowd cheers. The girl flinches slightly at the burst of heat. The prince notices. "You don't like fire?" he asks. "I like it," she says, "when I'm the one holding the torch." He chuckles. "That makes two of us." Their eyes meet again, this time without lanterns or metaphors in the way. Just two people in borrowed clothes trying to find meaning in the blur of color and noise. Someone starts singing a deep rhythmic song about caravans and lost rivers, and the crowd begins to sway. The prince doesn't ask, doesn't assume, just offers her his hand with the kind of quiet gesture you'd miss if you blinked. She looks at it for a beat too long. Then, delicately, deliberately, she places her lantern on the fountain's rim, takes his hand and steps forward into the sway. The song wraps around them like a veil. They don't dance so much as drift. Her movements are practiced, precise. His are charmingly uncertain, like someone who's read about dancing but wasn't allowed to attend the classes. Still they move together, not lovers, not yet. Just a girl who didn't plan to be seen and a boy who always felt invisible in plain sight, suspended for a few perfect minutes beneath the bobbing glow of paper moons. You lean against the archway, pretending not to watch, but of course you do. Everyone does. The next morning you find yourself in the inner courtyard, the one with the carved lion fountains and the smell of too much myrrh, carrying an excuse disguised as a message. The prince sent you. Or maybe you volunteered? Or maybe the excuse made you up and you're just living inside it now. Either way, you're here. The excuse the prince requires assistance in the preparation of his new scent profile. The real reason he wants to see her again? And someone needs to make that not weird. So here you are, pretending to care about perfume. The slave girls tend the oil room like a sacred temple. Small glass vials line the walls, some clear, some smoky, each filled with thick, gleaming drops of essence: rose, cedar, civet, cinnamon, myrtle, cardamom. There's even a bottle of crocodile musk which smells exactly like the name suggests and costs more than some entire villages. She's already in the room when you arrive, leaning over a mixing tray, one hand carefully guiding a pipette, the other holding a scrap of parchment covered in ratios and notes. Her sleeves are rolled up, surprising, considering sleeves in the palace are usually more about statement than function, and her face is lit with that rare expression, focus without performance. She glances up briefly.
Are you here for saffron oil or idle gossip? You grin. Why not both? She gestures toward the empty stool beside her. You sit, and for a moment you both just listen to the quiet bubbling of infused oil, the distant trickle of the lion fountains, and the occasional sneeze from the guard who's very clearly allergic to jasmine. I didn't know you studied scents, you say. I didn't, she replies, but they gave me the keys to the oil room anyway. Thought it would keep me busy or quiet. How's that working out for them? She smiles without showing teeth. You tell me, mainstream historical fact in Abbasid palaces, perfumes weren't just luxuries. They were identity markers, spiritual tools, even diplomatic weapons. A well-crafted personal scent could distinguish a nobleman from a commoner, or signal intent at court. Recipes were closely guarded, often passed down in code. Some even contained poetry, yes, literal poetry, embedded in the formula as mnemonic devices.
She dips a stick into the oil she's mixing and waves it gently in the air. Try this. You lean forward. Inhale. It hits in waves, first orange blossom, bright, clean, like a newly washed poem. Then sandalwood, warm and grounding. Finally, something bitter green, almost sharp, like a memory with thorns. It's complicated, you say? She nods. So is he. You look at her. She's still focused on the tray, but you sense it, the soft fold of something like curiosity pressing at the edge of her detachment. You're talking about the prince. She doesn't confirm. She doesn't have to. She reaches for another bottle, this one filled with a clear, oil-tinged pale green. Mint. For clarity. Maybe balance. And the bitterness, unavoidable, she says simply. But not permanent. She dips a reed pen into ink and jots something onto her parchment. The handwriting is delicate, slanted with a small flourish on the tails of her dal and cough. Not enough to show off. Just enough to prove she could. You hand her a folded note. He wrote again. She doesn't take it right away. Instead, she studies your face. You read it. No, you lie, but the twitch in her lip tells you she doesn't believe you. Still, she accepts the note. Historians still argue whether these early exchanges were truly poetic or simply infatuated drivel. Some sources claim the prince's letters were worthy of literary anthologies. Others suggest the grammar alone was a crime against syntax. What's agreed upon she kept everyone. She slips the note into her sash without opening it. Tell him, she says, that orange blossom fades, but cedar lingers. You raise an eyebrow. Is that a metaphor or a recipe? Both, she replies. He should learn to tell the difference. There's a fringe tidbit that comes to mind. Some Abbasid perfumers believed scent carried memory through the soul, that a smell could bypass logic and embed itself into your afterlife, re-emerging on Judgment Day like a perfume ghost. No one could quite prove it, but incense rituals took on a whole new urgency after that theory caught fire, literally and figuratively. You help her tidy up, though she's clearly more efficient alone. The room grows quieter as the oils are sealed, the trays rinsed, and the guards outside begin muttering about midday heat. As you step toward the door, she speaks again, soft but certain. He'll keep writing, she says. And I'll keep mixing, you glance back. And eventually, she shrugs. Eventually the room will smell like something worth remembering, and just like that you're dismissed. Outside the garden, heat hits you like a whispering towel. The prince is waiting under the shade of a date palm, pretending to read a scroll while sneaking glances toward the oil room. Well, he asks. You hand him the imagined scent wrapped in metaphor and sarcasm. She said cedar lingers. He closes his eyes for a moment, breathes in like he can smell it already. She also said you had to learn the difference between metaphor and a recipe. He chuckles, already pulling out a reed pen. Impossible. All good recipes are metaphors. By now, the prince has invented an entire academic pursuit called unofficial literacy instruction, which just happens to take place in the quietest corners of the palace, always with only 2 people in attendance, himself and the girl from Samarkand. The official excuse is charming. He's offering to teach her to read Arabic calligraphy properly, so that one day, should she choose to recite the mu'allaqat, or copy court poetry, she won't embarrass the Abbasid literary tradition. It's quite noble if you ignore the fact that her handwriting is already better than his, and she has an unnerving habit of correcting him politely mid-verse. Today the lesson is held beneath the hanging silks of the textiles gallery. Bolts of fabric from India, Yemen and Byzantium drift above you like colourful clouds, filtering the sunlight into gentle pastels. It's like sitting inside a kaleidoscope designed by a very elegant bird. The prince has brought 2 scrolls, 4 ink pots, all in different colours, just in case she prefers visual variety and a smug confidence that he's about to impress her. She brings a single reed pen and a face that says, "This better be worth leaving my scented oils for." He clears his throat. Let's begin with a poem by Abu Nuwas. Are you familiar? She blinks. He's the one who insulted wine and praised it in the same verse. Yes, technically that's most poets, he says. Mainstream historical fact. Abu Nuwas was one of the most famous poets of the Abbasid era, flamboyant, scandalous, and beloved by the court. His verses mixed classical forms with playful irreverence, often weaving forbidden themes with religious undertones, much to the discomfort of the more rigid scholars. Today's lesson scroll is a love poem. Shocking, we know. The prince pretends it's just a literary exercise. He reads aloud, "You who taught the rose to blush, who whispers into jasmine at dawn, come near, and the garden forgets itself." She squints at the calligraphy. "Your sin is crooked." He tries not to look wounded. It's stylistic. "It's also a word for tooth," she says, amused. The verse says the garden forgets its dentist. You wheeze a little, trying to hold back laughter. The prince sighs and tries again, adjusting his stroke. She watches closely. He pretends not to notice. "I see what you're doing," she says, after a pause. He blinks. Which part? She picks up her pen and mimics his writing style, flourishes drama, the whole theatrical wrist movement. "Teaching me to read so you can write things at me and pretend they're educational." He grins, not denying it. "Am I that obvious?" She dabs her pen, then adds a line beneath his verse. Her handwriting flows like water, sharp at the edges but soft in the middle. Words are only sweet when they're stolen. He stares at the phrase for a long moment. "Did you just write that?" She shrugs, spinning her reed pen like a dagger between her fingers. Historians still argue whether this so-called tutoring was actually permitted or merely tolerated by an indulgent court. Some suggest the Caliph's son was known to take liberties with protocol, while others insist no such private meetings occurred. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle, likely scrawled in an old love note no one was supposed to keep. The lesson drifts from calligraphy to vocabulary. He pretends not to notice that she already knows the difference between hub love and hawa desire. She pretends not to notice that he lingers too long on verses involving longing across vast deserts. Then unexpectedly she asks him to define a word, niya. He pauses. Intention, he says.
Why she meets his gaze? Because people speak poetry when their hearts are loud. But sometimes the mouth doesn't know what the heart meant to say. He looks at her for a long time. You think I'm saying something? She leans back, resting one elbow on a stack of Persian wool. You're shouting my prince with very pretty ink. He smiles, then adds softly, and you're you listening? She folds the fabric between her fingers. I'm deciding whether it's real or just well-practiced noise. Fringe tidbit: in some Abbasid literary salons, it was common for poets to perform in pairs, one offering a line, the other responding like a duel. The audience would judge not by content alone, but by subtlety, rhythm, and the ability to build on emotion without collapsing into cliché. It was considered a form of flirtation when done in whispers. Outside, the sun lowers, turning the silks above you into burning clouds. The lesson's over, though no one says so.
He reaches for the scroll to roll it up, and their hands brush. It's a moment so brief, it barely qualifies as one. But still, she doesn't flinch. Tomorrow, he asks. She lifts a brow. Will you bring better poetry? I'll bring saffron ink, he promises. Then I'll bring questions. As she walks away, he watches her, not like a conqueror or a prince expecting devotion, more like a man who's finally found something worth learning. You trail after her quietly, but not before noticing the scroll. She left behind a single line written in gold. When the ink runs out, what will your silence write? The marble baths echo with the kind of whispers that would make a librarian sweat. Steam curls through the air like gossip that forgot its filter, and everywhere you turn, people are soaking, scrubbing, or pretending not to be eavesdropping, while absolutely doing just that. You're here delivering towels. Well, technically. It's amazing how many palace errands suddenly become urgent when you want to confirm rumors. And today the rumor is boiling hotter than the eucalyptus pool. The Caliph's son is in love with a servant girl who talks back. You step over a trail of rose petals, someone definitely overused, and pass through the women's quarters carefully. A eunuch nods at you with a face that says, I won't say anything if you don't trip over your own intentions. In the far corner, past the columns shaped like lotus blossoms, you spot her. The girl from Samarkand. She's wrapped in a linen towel, her hair slicked back and dripping slowly onto her collarbone. She's surrounded not by attendants, but by curiosity. 3 concubines lounge nearby, pretending not to be intensely invested in her existence. One plays with a strand of pearls. Another hums a song with just enough pause to hear responses. The third, older and sharper than the rest, finally breaks the charade. So, she says, smiling thinly. You mix oils and verses now. The girl doesn't flinch, only if they're flammable. You suppress a snort. The elder concubine raises one eyebrow. Careful. Wit doesn't protect you here. Looks do. Lineage does. And obedience, the girl asks sweetly. Does that count, or has that gone out of fashion? Touché? Mainstream historical fact. Eunuchs served not only as guardians of the harem, but as conduits of information. Think royal postal system meets palace tabloid. Nothing stayed secret for long, especially not romance. And the harem was no monolith of submission. It was a political jungle. Beauty, birth charm, loyalty, all currencies, and envy was always on sale. A younger girl leans closer. Is it true he writes you letters? The Samarkand girl runs her hand along the water's surface. If he does, they must be very quiet letters. No one's heard them but the ink. The pearl player snorts. He wrote one to me once. Compared me to a rose that blooms in shadow. The Samarkand girl tilts her head. Did he mean you were the shadow or the bloom laughter? Not from the concubines, from one of the attendants folding towels. You. Oops. She sees you and smiles just a flicker. Enough to say, yes, I saw you hiding behind those steam clouds pretending to be furniture. Fringe tidbits, some harem attendants trained specifically in listening. Not spying, mind you, listening, then accidentally passed their overheard tidbits to eunuchs who passed them to scribes who passed them to, you guessed it, the Caliph. If you ever wondered how empires ran on sandals and secrets, this is it. The elder concubine stands water dripping from her arms like silk. Enjoy your place, girl. But remember, warm water turns cold quickly. The girl from Samarkand doesn't answer. She just sinks deeper into the bath until only her chin and eyes remain visible, floating like a statue, half lost to time. Later you find the prince sprawled on a terrace couch attempting to braid his own hair out of sheer frustration. Spoiler, he's terrible at it. She's being cornered, you tell him. He frowns. By whom? By everyone. He sighs. They fear what's different. You hand him a note. She said the ink is quiet, but it hears. He reads the note in silence. It's brief, a single sentence. What will you write when I answer back? He smiles. She's challenging me. She's protecting herself, you say. This isn't a poem, it's survival. Historians still argue whether the Caliph's son truly understood the danger his attention brought to the girl. Some claim he was naive, lost in verses. Others insist he knew exactly what he was doing, using his presence as both shield and signal. The truth, probably a mix of charm, recklessness, and youth. He dips his pen in fresh ink. What are you writing, you ask? Something quiet, he murmurs. Something the steam can't carry away. By late afternoon, the heat clings to the walls like a sulking cat, and you find yourself trudging across the prayer courtyard with a slip of parchment burning a hole in your robe. Another poem, another risk, another moment of teenage audacity wrapped in divine metaphors. The prince is at it again. This time he's done something bold, or stupid, or both, which historically tend to be the same thing in royal circles. You reach the mosque courtyard just as the last artisan is stepping back from the wall. He tucks his brushes into a cloth roll bows to the imam and mutters something about peculiar commissions. The imam, looking slightly baffled, stares up at the new inscription painted in gleaming gold across one of the inner arches. The words glint in the fading sun. They're a line of poetry, a verse not from the Quran, not from any known hadith, and certainly not from an approved scholarly source. It reads, "If the garden of paradise blooms with silence." Why does your voice make the jasmine jealous? It is without question one of the princes. You try to look concerned. You mostly succeed. Mainstream historical fact. Abbasid mosques were architectural marvels, domes like floating pearls, minarets that touched the sky, and walls lined with calligraphy so intricate You could spend a lifetime reading them and never finish. But every line was chosen with care, often divine scripture, sometimes royal decrees. Personal poetry, not exactly standard protocol. The Imam notices you lurking and beckons you over. "Did you deliver this?" he asks, pointing at the verse. You make a face somewhere between denial and "please don't smite me." "It appeared with the morning light," you say, innocently, like dew. "Dew doesn't sign its name," he mutters, gesturing to the corner where, subtle but visible, the signature reads N. You make a mental note to remind the prince that signing his clandestine poetry is not, in fact, very clandestine. You head back to the scriptorium where the prince is waiting with the kind of hopeful expression usually reserved for peacocks trying to impress statues. Well, he asks, did they see it? They saw it, they read it, they also now know it was you. He pales. How you signed it? Oh, he pauses, then adds, but was it good you stare at him? On a scale from poetic genius to public scandal, I'd say both. He grins. She'll know it's for her. She'll also know you have the survival instincts of a melon. There's a rustle behind you. A scroll slides beneath the door. The prince dives for it like it's a royal pardon, unrolling it carefully. One line, "If silence is paradise, perhaps leave it untouched next time." He reads it, then laughs, not a mocking laugh, a delighted one. She's furious. That's good. Is it? She's engaging? You sound like you're describing a wild falcon. He nods. She is. Historians still argue whether this poem on the wall incident happened. There's a vague reference in a 10th century manuscript about a nobleman's verse defiling the prayer space, but it doesn't name names. The timing lines up. And honestly, if it wasn't him, it was definitely someone with equally terrible impulse control and an overdeveloped metaphor gland. Back in the harem wing, the girl from Samarkand sits on her window bench watching the pigeons wheel through the sky like tiny paper prayers. She holds the newest note in her lap, unopened. A cup of cold tea rests beside her untouched. Her chambermate leans in. Did you see it? She doesn't answer. The poem the girl presses. In the mosque, still no reply. He must be mad about you. The Samarkand girl lifts her gaze. Then he should have chosen a quieter madness. Later alone, she finally reads the note. It's not a poem this time. Just a line hastily scribbled. Even a whisper can echo where it's not welcome. I'm sorry. She stares at it for a long time, then folds it carefully and tucks it into a small cloth pouch with the others. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just filed. Fringe tidbit. Some Abbasid women, especially those trained in poetry and music, kept little cloth pouches of love notes folded into paper, origami, and perfumed with ambergris. They were called whisper satchels and were considered both keepsake and warning reminders of words that had power but no permission. Back in the scriptorium, the prince starts drafting his next line. You stop him. Maybe you say, let the jasmine breathe for a while. He nods, but you know him well enough to recognize the glint in his eyes. He's already composing again. The gardens are quieter now, not silent. Exactly. Nothing in the palace ever is but quieter in that dense, loaded way that implies someone's trying very hard not to be overheard. You walk along the gravel path beneath swaying date palms past the reflecting pool where dragonflies stitch ripples into the surface until you reach the fig grove. That's where they are. The Caliph's son and the girl from Samarkand. They're sitting on opposite sides of a stone bench, as though the space between them is a political border. He's holding a date, turning it slowly between his fingers. She's pretending to examine the bark of a nearby tree. You linger behind a tall hedge conveniently invisible. So, she says without looking at him, you painted poetry on a mosque wall. He clears his throat. It wasn't painted, it was gilded. Oh, gilded, she echoes. Well, that's entirely different. Very subtle. Gold always is. He winces. I thought it might charm me. He looks at her then. No, not charm. I thought it might tell the truth. She scoffs. Truth, written in gold, sounds expensive. He fumbles for a response, but she holds up a hand.
I'm not angry, she says quieter now. I'm tired. Of what? The attention? The whispers? The knowledge that one misplaced poem could get her reassigned, removed, or worse? You don't have to ask. It's all written in the tension of her shoulders, the stiffness in her spine. Mainstream historical fact. While many Abbasid courts were known for their patronage of the arts, the boundaries of acceptability were thin as a veil. Public declarations, especially of a romantic nature, could cross into scandal with the speed of a courier on horseback. And while men might face ridicule or political slapback, women bore the brunt of reputational damage. The prince offers her the date. She doesn't take it. Instead, she says, "Do you know what the inside of a date looks like?" He blinks sticky. She cracks a smile despite herself. Yes, but also divided. There's a hard pit in the middle that no sweetness can reach. A silence follows. Even the birds seem to pause.
She finally turns to him. You're not cruel, but you're careless. And when someone like you is careless, someone like me disappears. That lands. You can see it hit him like a missed step on marble, sudden and sickening. I never meant to endanger you, he says. You didn't mean to. She agrees. That's the part that stings. There's a fringe tidbit you remember now. Some courtiers would confess their feelings through food. Offering a certain kind of date meant devotion. A pomegranate meant desire. Bitter almonds meant rejection. The palace kitchen kept quiet about it, but they always noticed who ate what and when. He pulls something from his sleeve, a small square of parchment. Then let me say something without decoration. She eyes the note, doesn't reach for it. He reads it aloud instead. No gold, no mosque, no garden rhyme. Only this, I see you, and I don't look away. Silence again. This one longer, not loaded, just still. She breathes in deeply and finally says, "Then meet me where no one else listens." He blinks. Where? She glances up at the swaying palm fronds above them. The wind rustles through, carrying birdsong, distant laughter, the clink of teacups from a nearby balcony. Tomorrow, she says, when the muezzin calls the late prayer, where the kitchen smoke meets the wind. Then she stands, doesn't wait for his response, walks away with the grace of someone who's made peace with her own pacing. He sits very still, still holding the untouched date. You step into the clearing, finally, letting your sandals crunch the gravel. Well, you say, that went better than expected. He sighs. She's right, isn't she, about the carelessness? He nods. You sit beside him, stare up at the fronds. You were born in a palace where even the walls call you lord. But not everyone else lives in a place made of cushions and echoing compliments. He chuckles without humor. No, some live in corners made of incense and silence. Historians still debate whether this was the turning point when the prince began to understand that admiration is not affection and that love, if it exists, asks for permission. Some believe the girl vanished shortly after this meeting. Others claim she was promoted, given her own rooms and duties, no longer a slave but a scholar. Both stories might be true or neither. What matters is this: they met beneath the palms and said things too difficult for parchment. You rise, dusting off your robe. So what now? He looks at the date in his palm. Then quietly he sets it down on the bench and walks away. Later that night, someone finds that date still sitting there, unbitten, shriveled slightly in the heat. They leave it. Some things aren't meant to be sweetened. The falcon arrives just after dawn. You're halfway through a very mediocre breakfast flatbread and something the kitchen swears is yogurt but tastes suspiciously like fear when a shadow flits past the lattice window. You squint upward, mouth full, and there it is, a hooded falcon, circling once, twice, then diving with all the grace of a thrown dagger. It lands on the edge of the terrace like it owns the place, which, to be fair, it kind of does. The prince follows shortly behind, breathless, barefoot, and radiating the kind of excitement usually reserved for small children and very wealthy collectors. She released it, he says, almost giddy. She actually released it. You stare at the falcon. It stares back. You're not convinced it likes you. Okay, you say. And this is good because he holds up a sliver of parchment tied delicately to the falcon's leg with red thread. His hands shake slightly as he unties it. You peek over his shoulder as he reads. The message is short. I do not belong in cages, even gilded ones, but I choose to stay a little longer. He rereads it 3 times, lips moving with each syllable, like if he says it softly enough the words might become permanent. Mainstream historical fact. Falconry was a prized art in the Abbasid court. Princes were often trained from a young age in the breeding and training of birds of prey. But more than a sport, falcons symbolized power, nobility, and restraint. A well-trained falcon obeyed, but could fly at any moment, much like certain sharp-eyed girls from the East. She let it go, he says, again wonderstruck. That means something. You eye the falcon. It could also mean she's just very dramatic. He doesn't take offense. Instead, he gently strokes the bird's feathers, murmuring something to it in a language that might be Arabic or poetry or pure nonsense. She named it Sabah, he says. Morning, he nods, because she said it always arrives with new choices. You exhale. So what's your choice? He glances at the parchment again, then at the falcon. I'll write nothing today, he says. No poems, no verses, just silence. You blink. Is that romantic or a tantrum? Neither, he says. It's respect. There's a fringe tidbit you recall. In some Abbasid love traditions, silence was used as the most intimate form of affection. A suitor would withhold words, not as punishment, but as invitation, offering space instead of pressure, waiting for the beloved to speak first. It was known as the pause between pearls, referencing the gaps between the beads on a lover's necklace. The prince returns the falcon to its perch. It shuffles once, then settles, regal, unbothered, slightly judgy. Elsewhere in the palace, the girl from Samarkand leans against the garden arch, arms folded, watching the morning unfold with measured calm. She's already heard about the falcon's return. News travels fast in a palace full of whispering silk. A servant bows low and offers her a tray of honey-dipped figs. She selects one without comment. She'll take her time, the prince tells you later, as you walk along the parapet overlooking the stables. She doesn't move when pushed. No, you agree. She moves when ready, or not at all. He nods. Do you know, he says after a moment, that some birds return not because they're trained, but because they remember the hand that released them. You tilt your head. Is this about falconry or feelings? He shrugs. Yes. Later that afternoon, a court physician stops the prince in the corridor. Your falcon was seen landing on the astronomy tower, and the physician squints. She was also seen there. He tries to appear neutral, fails completely. Did she say anything, he asks. The physician shakes his head. No, but she stayed a long time, just sitting with the bird. Historians still argue whether this falcon was real or a metaphor, a symbolic creature created by later scribes to add literary flair to an already strange love story. But several palace inventories from the time list a hooded female falcon named Sabah, marked as a personal gift from the crown prince and trained to carry silk-threaded messages. In the moonlight, the prince sits alone in the garden, the falcon perched nearby, cooing softly as though tired of human complications. He speaks quietly. She's not mine, not by duty, not by title. You nod. But maybe, for now, she's here. And really, what more could a falcon or a prince ask for? You know something is wrong the moment you step into the antechamber. The air feels too still, like it's been waiting to deliver bad news. Scribes whisper behind scrolls. Eunuchs step more softly than usual, and even the doves in the lattice seem to coo at a lower volume. The court physician stands at the center of the room, arms crossed, frown carved deep as the tigress. He sees you first. Tell him I need to speak with him privately, and tell him not to argue. You blink. Is he dying? No, the physician says grimly. But if he keeps going down this path, someone will be. You find the prince in the far corridor, barefoot again, always barefoot, when brooding and feeding sesame seeds to a squirrel that clearly does not want them. You've interrupted him mid-offering. She's not a squirrel, you know, you say? He sighs. Saba rejected me today, literally turned her back. Birds are such snobs. You pause. The physician wants to speak with you. He's serious. The prince frowns. I'm not sick. Not physically. 10 minutes later, the physician closes the chamber door behind him. No guards, no attendants. Just the three of you and an awkward silence. I'm going to speak plainly, the physician begins. Not as a court servant.
As a man who has seen too many idealists ruined by their own hearts. Oh good, the prince mutters, a romantic diagnosis. The physician leans forward. You are not in love. You are in fascination. There is a difference. One roots itself in respect, the other in projection, and projection in your position. That's dangerous. The prince opens his mouth to respond, but the physician holds up a hand. Listen to me, I've seen this before. A noble falls for someone outside his station, someone clever, someone bright. And because he's never had to earn affection, he mistakes pursuit for purpose. The room is quiet now. Even the prince's sarcasm seems to fold itself up like a fan. She doesn't need you to rescue her, the physician says. She needs you to recognize she doesn't belong to you. Mainstream historical fact. Physicians in the Abbasid court were not merely doctors. They were often philosophers, scholars, even theologians.
Trusted by caliphs, they advised on everything from medicine to ethics. Some were known for refusing bribes and treating slaves and nobles alike, a kind of moral compass in a court tilted by politics and perfume. The prince is quiet for a long time. Then I'm not trying to possess her. The physician softens, but only slightly. Perhaps not consciously. But your intentions have weight. You drop a pebble, the ripples don't stop at your feet. Fringe tidbit. There's an obscure manuscript in the Beit al-Hikmah House of Wisdom that describes love as a fire ignited by proximity but sustained by distance. The metaphor may be overcooked, but the logic's sound. In royal circles, nearness isn't intimacy, it's exposure. The physician pours a small cup of tea, hands it to the prince. Drink. Calm yourself. The prince takes it, sipping quietly. I just want her to know, he says eventually, that I see her. Truly. And does she want to be seen, the physician asks? Or does she want space to see you without the shadow of a title, in the way you say nothing, because finally someone else is saying the things you've been thinking all along? Later that night you find the prince again, this time in the aviary. Saba perches nearby, eyes closed, as though exhausted by human drama. She ignored me again, he says softly. She's a falcon, you reply. Ignoring is part of the job description. He laughs a little, then pulls something from his sleeve. A letter, sealed. To her, you ask. No, he says, to my father. You blink, the Caliph. He nods. What does it say? He hesitates. Nothing scandalous, just an admission that I may have made something personal into something political, and that if anything happens to her, it will be because I let my feelings write laws where they didn't belong. You stare. You're asking for forgiveness. He shakes his head. I'm offering accountability. Historians still argue whether the Caliph ever saw this letter, or if it was intercepted, torn up, burned by someone who thought protecting the prince meant silencing him. But traces of it remain. A reference in a later vizier's diary, a verse that echoes the language, enough to believe it existed and that it mattered. In the gardens, the girl from Samarkand lights a single candle in her room. She opens her pouch of letters, removes the most recent, reads it, then for the first time writes back. The vizier's ledger smells of ink, old goat hide, and the faint terror of clerks who know a miswritten name could mean beheading. You've never liked this room, too quiet, too symmetrical. The shelves loom like judges, and every quill stroke sounds like a verdict. You're not alone. The prince stands beside you, trying to look relaxed, while casually scanning an open scroll that's anything but casual. There, just under the heading, Palace Allocations, Miscellaneous Transfers, Personal Requests. 2 names, hidden in a sea of trade debts, travel stipends, and grain surcharges. His title is must as Qamar al-Din, Moon of the Faith. Her name isn't used at all, just a poetic euphemism, one pearl of foreign sea presently under palace contract. It's poetry masquerading as bureaucracy. The prince is doing, of course. He doesn't smile. She's not a pearl, he mutters. She's a tempest. Tempests don't fit in ledgers, you reply, but pearls do. Mainstream historical fact. Abbasid ledgers weren't just financial records. They were coded political archives. Poets, concubines, spies and servants all passed through those pages, buried under layers of euphemism. The more dangerous someone was to the court's order, the more delicately they were named. The vizier, of course, is not fooled. You both flinch when the door opens. Grand Vizier Ibn Rashid enters like a cloud that knows it's about to thunder. He's tall, spare, always in cream-coloured robes that remain spotless no matter how much chaos surrounds him. His beard is forked at the chin like his gaze. Moon of the Faith, he greets the prince without warmth. Out for a stroll in the accounting winds, the prince inclines his head, just following a whisper. The vizier raises a brow. We don't record whispers, only consequences. He steps forward and shuts the ledger with an echoing thunk. "I know what this is," he says calmly. "I know who this is about." You try to speak. He silences you with a glance. "Let me remind your highness," he says to the prince, "that the palace is a sieve. No matter how gold your ink or subtle your signature, the liquid of rumor finds a way through." The prince says nothing. "Do you think you are the first to fall for a voice behind a veil?" The vizier continues. "Do you imagine your heart is new?" The silence deepens. "No," the prince says at last, "but maybe it's the first to mean it." For a flicker of a second, the vizier's face betrays something close to regret or memory. Then it's gone. He turns away and opens a different scroll. The Caliph hasn't asked yet, but he will. And when he does, I will not lie. He traces a finger down the page. There is a caravan leaving for Qazvin, a scholar's appointment, minor, quiet. She could accompany them. It would settle things. The prince's breath catches. "You want her exiled?" "No," the vizier says. "I want her preserved before someone less delicate decides her presence is an affront." The prince's hands curl into fists. Fringe tidbit in Abbasid court dynamics, exile was often dressed in opportunity. Appointments in distant cities, assignments to libraries or border posts. It was a way to remove a problem without drawing blood, though blood was always the fallback option. You speak up. Would she be safe? The vizier looks at you, safer than she is now. The prince shakes his head. She doesn't belong in a ledger or a caravan. She belongs where she chooses. The vizier closes the scroll. Then pray her choice is wise. Because my job is not to protect hearts, it is to protect the house that holds them. Later, under the olive trees near the aviary, you and the prince sit in silence. He's holding one of her letters. It's different this time. Not a poem, not a riddle, a statement. I know the ink now. I see where the words bleed into duty. I do not blame you, but I will not be written on a list. She knows, he says softly. You nod. She always did. Historians still debate whether the ledger entry was erased. One scribe's diary mentions a sudden revision on page 417 of the palace account, scrolls a line scratched out replaced with a line of empty dashes. Whether it was the prince, the vizier, or someone in between, we don't know, but something changed. That night, the girl from Samarkand walks through the garden without guards. She stands beneath the pomegranate tree, lantern in hand. She doesn't wait long. The prince joins her. They don't speak. They don't need to. And overhead, the leaves shiver not from wind, but from the breath of the story, quietly writing itself without ink. The music tonight is not for guests. It trickles from the servants' quarters light, and lopsided a rhythm stitched together from leftover strings and hopeful flutes. You recognize the tune. It's an old folk melody from the mountains near Nishapur, usually played when someone's trying not to cry in public. You pause near the archway, leaning just out of sight. Inside the room flickers with lamplight. A few servants lounge on woven mats, sipping warm date wine out of copper cups. Someone plays the lute badly. There's laughter unpolished and too loud. Someone tells a joke about a mule, a merchant, and a barrel of saffron that makes absolutely no sense, but the timing is perfect, so everyone laughs anyway. And there in the center is her, the girl from Samarkand, barefoot hair, unbraided sleeves, rolled up to her elbows. She's not speaking, not preening, not performing. She's dancing, not like the court dancers. No delicate twirls, no choreographed precision, but something looser, freer, a spiral of arms and hips that moves like smoke with intent. It's not about seduction, it's about space, about taking it, owning it, about letting her body say the things she's been editing in her head for weeks. The prince is not here, and for once neither are you. You're watching, sure, but not interfering, because this, right now, belongs to her. Mainstream historical fact. Abbasid palaces were vast, layered places, and the servants' world, its kitchens, quarters, and night rituals had its own customs. Music wasn't banned, but it was unofficial, a way to exhale after a day of tension. Some songs were lullabies, others were coded prayers, and once in a while they were resistance. The room claps along gently. Someone taps a spoon against a bowl to keep rhythm. She laughs when she trips over her own step and blames it on the floor. Her voice, unshaped by expectation, is lower than you remembered, more textured like bread crust with honey. A fringe tidbit flits across your mind. Some slave girls in the Abbasid courts were trained not only in etiquette music and philosophy, but in the art of knowing when to be invisible, to be a shadow when needed and a flame when permitted. She, it seems, has mastered both. When the song ends, someone hands her a dried fig wrapped in cloth. She accepts it with a mock bow like a knight accepting a royal sword. The room erupts in claps again. Then quietly, she slips away. You follow discreet at a distance. You find her in the corridor between the kitchens and the herb garden, her back against a cool tile wall, chest rising and falling like she's just remembered she has a body. "I thought I saw you," she says without looking up. "You step closer, you dance well." She shrugs. "Not well, just..." Finally, there's a pause. She glances at you sideways. Does he know no good? You nod, why she thinks for a while before answering. Because everything with him is a verse, a symbol, a gesture made for meaning. She leans her head back against the wall. Sometimes I want to exist without being interpreted. You get it? The prince, for all his softness, wraps the world in metaphors. He means well, but she is not a metaphor. She is not a rose or a falcon or a trembling note on a reed flute. She is herself. And right now, that self wants a moment without gravity. He would have loved it, you say. I know, she replies. That's the problem. You both fall silent. The smell of mint and bread wafts in from the kitchens. Somewhere, someone drops a pan. Nobody cares. Then softly, "He's not trying to control you," I know, she says. "But he's trying to frame me." You tilt your head. "As if I'm a painting," she continues, "and he wants the best lighting, the softest brush. But I'm not a scene, I'm a storm." Historians still argue whether this was the night she changed her mind or strengthened her resolve. There's a note in the palace archives about a servant girl's unsanctioned celebration, but it lists no punishment, which is unusual. Perhaps the right people looked away. Or perhaps the vizier, who heard about it from someone who heard about it from someone else, chose to do nothing for once. Later, you pass the prince in the western hall. He's pacing, rewriting something for the 5th time. You don't tell him about the dancing, not yet. Let her keep that one. Let her have a night where her body spoke and no one wrote it down. The harp room has a peculiar silence, the kind not born of absence but of waiting. You step in quietly, the scent of cedar wood and old string resin brushing past your nose. The windows are half covered with patterned silk, letting sunlight in like shy confession. She's already there. Seated cross-legged on a cushion, a small mirror balanced on her lap. Not a new one. not polished brass or silvered glass. This mirror is cracked, hairline diagonal, like a flaw the craftsman never meant to sell. But it reflects just enough. A fragment of her face here, a slice of her eye there. If you didn't know her, you'd think she was two different people stitched together in broken glass. She doesn't look up as you enter. "Did he send you?" she asks. "No," she sighs. "Then you came to check if I'm still in one piece." You glance at the harp beside her. Its strings are dusty. One of them is snapped, curled like a question mark. "Someone tried to tune it yesterday," she says. It didn't appreciate the interference. You sit beside her, careful not to touch the cushion's embroidered edge. That string was always too tight. She hums. That's what they say about me. Outside, a minor bird sings an unconvincing lullaby. Mainstream historical fact harps or qanuns were common in the Abbasid court, often played during private gatherings of nobles or in the harem's musical salons. But unlike other instruments, they were considered introspective, melancholic. A harp wasn't meant for celebration. It was for thinking too long and saying too little. She lifts the mirror and studies herself. "Sometimes I forget what I look like." She murmurs. "You're reminded often enough," you reply. "Not really," she says. "They describe me, compare me.
Rarely do they see me." She touches the crack in the mirror, lightly running her finger along it. He sees the part he wants, the reflection that flatters his hope, and the part that doesn't. She glances at you. Do you see it? You do. She's tired. Not from labor, but from being observed, from being the subject of verses, the axis of secret maps, the metaphor of someone else's growth. He means well, you offer. "So do thunderstorms," she replies. You both smile at that, but it hangs a little too true in the air. She shifts, pulling her legs beneath her. "I found a letter," she says, "from his brother." Your eyebrows rise. "Not to me," she adds. "To the vizier. You stay quiet. He warned him, said I was a risk to the prince's discipline, that I muddied the chain of command through emotional manipulation." Her voice is flat, now ironed smooth.
Fringe tidbit. In some dynastic courts, palace women were frequently accused of manipulation, especially if they demonstrated intelligence or attracted affection from high-ranking men. It became a default accusation, coded language for uncomfortable influence. Letters like the one she found were standard tools in political sabotage. "What will you do?" you ask. "I don't know." She touches the harp again, plucks a single string. It hums, faint and mournful. Then she hands you the mirror. "I want you to give this to him." You blink. "The prince." She nods. "Why?" She shrugs. "Let him see what I see. Let him try holding something that can't be smoothed or rewritten." You weigh the mirror in your hand. It's heavier than expected, or maybe the moment is. "He might not understand." "He will," she says, "or he won't. Either way, the crack will stay." Historians still argue whether the mirror existed. Some chroniclers claim a poem emerged soon after this period, written by the prince, titled Refraction. It speaks of broken glass and the beauty of distortion. The tone is softer than his earlier work, less declaration, more question. You find him later in the garden, leaning over a fountain, scribbling into his notebook. You hand him the mirror wordlessly. He stares at it, traces the fracture with one finger, and for the first time he doesn't reach for his pen. He just sits there, holding it, looking. The Palace Library is hosting a poetry duel tonight. Not a real duel, of course, no swords or thrown figs. Just ink reputation and the kind of subtle viciousness only scholars can muster with meter and metaphor. The rules are simple. Two anonymous poets submit verses to the head scribe. The court listens, the crowd votes. The winner gets a silver filigree pen. The loser, immortalized in scrolls as the other one. The prince is jittery. He sits at the back of the grand hall, veiled behind a carved mashrabia screen, fiddling with the hem of his robe like it holds the secret to world peace. You're beside him with a rolled parchment on your lap. His submission. "I shouldn't have entered," he mutters, for the 5th time. You say that every time you do something poetic and deeply impractical? That's because it's always true. He peeks through the screen. The room is already half full. Poets in embroidered robes sip date wine. Eunuchs in plum-coloured sashes take wagers under the table. Someone's parrot keeps squawking the word melancholy, which feels like either a coincidence or divine intervention. "She'll be here," he whispers. You don't ask who she is, because you already know. You saw her earlier, standing beside the mosaic pillar, speaking to the physician with that calm, questioning tilt of her head. She carries herself differently now. Not with arrogance, but with chosen presence, like someone who's weighed the cost of visibility and paid it anyway. Mainstream historical fact. Poetry duels were a genuine cultural practice in the Abbasid courts, particularly in Baghdad. They served not only as entertainment, but as intellectual sparring, witty, coded competitions, where romantic, political, and even spiritual ideologies were debated through rhyme. They were high society's blood sport, with fewer bruises and more enjambment. The scribe steps forward, announces the first pairing, 2 poems, anonymous, titles only, due on stone. And What the Flame Forgot. Your heart lurches. Those are the ones. The scribe clears his throat, begins to read. The first poem, due on stone, is quiet, measured. It speaks of patience, of a surface that cannot accept softness, and the water that comes anyway. It ends on a note of impossible longing. I would vanish for you if only the vanishing left a mark. A quiet gasp ripples through the room. A few poets nod appreciatively. One scribbles it down, pretending it's his. Then comes the second. What the Flame Forgot is sharper, bolder. It begins mid-thought, mid-demand, and doesn't apologize for it. It speaks of heat, of being asked to glow for someone else's warmth, and the price of always being the light, but never the room. It ends like this. You wanted a lantern. I was the fire. A pause, a murmur, then applause. Someone drops their cup. Even the parrot mutters, "Well, damn." You turn to the prince. His face is pale and his lips move as he silently repeats the last line to himself. Then softly, "It's her. That's hers." You nod, and it's better. He closes his eyes, not in defeat, but in reverence. The scribe lifts the silver pen. The court favors What the Flame Forgot. Cheers. Scattered, unsure, but sincere. Somewhere near the front she sits, hands folded in her lap, expression unreadable. She doesn't gloat, doesn't beam, just listens. You lean toward him. You lost. I know, he whispers. Isn't it glorious fringe tidbit? It's rumored that one Caliph once fell in love with a concubine solely because she bested him in a poetic duel, and then refused the silver pen, claiming her words were already wealth enough. Her name lost. Her verses still sung. You leave the hall through the side door. He walks quietly beside you, clutching the rolled parchment he never got to share. She said I made her into a symbol, he says, and now she made herself into a voice. You pass the reflecting pool. He unrolls his poem, smooths the parchment and tears it delicately into strips, then tosses them into the water. They float for a moment, then sink. Not out of anger, he says, out of clarity. She finds him later that night, on the terrace, alone. She doesn't speak at first, just sits beside him watching the sky swirl with stars that don't care who won the silver pen. Then gently, I saw what you didn't submit. He doesn't answer. I would have liked to read it. He glances at her. I liked yours more. She exhales. I didn't write it to win. I know. He reaches into his sleeve, pulls out a single line, the one strip he didn't toss. He hands it to her. She reads, I was writing a garden. You walked in, holding fire. She smiles, and this time she doesn't walk away. The Caliph has eyes everywhere, not literal ones, thank the stars, but close enough viziers, eunuchs, merchants, nosy stable boys. 1,000 mouths whisper into 1,000 ears, and all those echoes eventually float up to the top of the world where the Caliph waits. And lately, the whispers are all about one thing, his son. More specifically, the girl beside his son, the girl who speaks in riddles and dances when no one's looking. The girl who now wins poetry duels and turns down compliments with the ease of someone born immune to flattery. The Caliph is not a fool. He's lived through assassinations, invasions, the occasional angry astrologer, and more than one spontaneous kitchen fire caused by romantic scandal. His beard is silver now, his patience thinner than parchment, and his tea always a little too bitter. He does not like surprises. He especially doesn't like poetic surprises, so when he requests a private audience with the prince, it's not really a request, you're not invited. But you linger outside the audience hall anyway, pacing beneath the blue and gold arches as your gut tries to digest a meal of dread and stale dates. Inside, the prince bows, deep. Low enough to show respect, not so low as to signal guilt. The Caliph waits until the chamber doors are closed, then gestures toward the empty cushion beside him. Sit, he says. No titles, no warmth. The prince obeys. Mainstream historical fact. Abbasid caliphs, especially during the later Golden Age, were deeply concerned with appearances. Even private matters like court romances were considered reflections of divine order. A son's love could, in theory, upset the balance of the court, or worse, become a symbol of rebellion if handled poorly. I have read the ledger, the Caliph says flatly. The prince swallows, I expected you would, and the poems the Caliph adds, even the ones you think are secret. Silence. The Caliph sips his bitter tea. Do you love her? The question lands like a slap, but it's not angry, just sharp. Yes, the prince says. The Caliph raises a brow. Do you love her, or do you love your idea of her? The prince hesitates. A dangerous hesitation. Because the Caliph continues, many men fall in love with reflections, with resistance, with the thrill of being challenged by something they don't control. She is not something, the prince replies quietly but firmly, and I do not want to control her. No, the Caliph murmurs, but you could. With a word, with a decree. I won't. Then you're a fool, the Caliph says calmly. Fringe tidbit. Some Abbasid rulers employed poets as spies, paying them not only to entertain, but to observe court behavior and romantic entanglements. Love, after all, was a form of power, and every power in the palace had to be catalogued, weighed, and if necessary, removed. The Caliph leans back, fingers steepled. She's clever, he admits. Too clever to be dismissed without causing noise. She asks for nothing, the prince says. Not rank, not gold, and yet she has you, which is more dangerous than any of those. Another silence, then in a voice like distant thunder, "What would you do if I sent her away?" The prince meets his father's eyes. "I would still write to her." The Caliph nods, "And if I forbade that, I'd still remember." That answer earns the tiniest twitch of the Caliph's mouth. Not a smile, but close. "You were always the poetic one," he says, sighing. He stands and walks toward a narrow window that looks out over the garden, the one where the girl sometimes walks at dawn alone, trailing her fingers along the hedge as though the leaves could give advice. "I cannot protect her," the Caliph says at last. "Not publicly, not if this continues. The court will see favoritism, the viziers will smell weakness." "She doesn't need protection," the prince replies, "just freedom." "Then be careful," the Caliph murmurs, "that your freedom does not become her prison." He turns to his son again. "You may see her quietly, discreetly. No more verses in mosques, no more signatures in ledgers, no more games." The prince bows. "Yes, father, and one more thing, yes." The Caliph pauses. "Don't lose her," he says, "not because of us, not because of this place." The prince looks up, surprised. The Caliph's voice is lower now. "I once wrote a poem, long ago, for someone who left before the ink dried." You don't know what's said after that. But later, when the prince emerges, his face is a mix of relief and something older, something quieter. Not joy, not sorrow, something like understanding. He knows, the prince tells you. And he's given me a thread. No knot, just a thread. You walk with him through the garden. The girl from Samarkand waits beneath the pomegranate tree. She holds no lantern, no falcon, only a question in her eyes. "He didn't forbid it," the prince says. She studies his face. "That's not permission." "No," he says, "but it's not a cage either, and for now that is enough." The cistern was never meant for poetry. It lies beneath the palace, beneath even the kitchens where warm spices fade into the chill of wet stone and the drip-drip rhythm of water echoing in the dark. It's a place of quiet utility where water is stored, not songs. But some messages don't care where they're written. Some verses find their own path. Tonight the prince walks the narrow tunnel leading to the cistern with a lamp in one hand and something strange in the other, a small basket filled with rose petals. Not perfumed ones, these are inked. Each petal holds a line, a phrase, a fragment of feeling. He's been writing them for days. You follow close behind, carrying the absurdity of this mission in your face. Just to be clear, you whisper, "We're scattering poetry into the water supply." Symbolically, he replies, "They'll drift. Down the channels, maybe she'll find one." She bathes in the east wing. Then eastward they go. You sigh. "This is the most romantic health hazard I've ever seen." He grins. Mainstream historical fact, Abbasid palaces used intricate cistern systems to store water during dry seasons. Some were so well designed they remained in use for centuries. Though unverified tales persist of secret messages sent down these waterways, petals, coins, or even scented oils added to perfume the entire system. Practical, number poetic. Absolutely. At the edge of the cistern he kneels. The water is still black and impossibly deep. A single frog croaks in protest, disturbed by your presence. He begins to release the petals, one by one. No ceremony, just breath and fingers and the faint rustle of paper-thin silk soaked in verse. You catch glimpses of the lines "I remember you" in the quiet of tea steam. Not everything fragrant is soft. I once mistook the moon for your shoulder. It's ridiculous and oddly moving. Some float, some sink, some drift off to who knows where, destined to confuse a kitchen boy or start a rumor about rose-scented omens in the water pipes. She might not see any of these, you say? She might not need to, he replies. Maybe I do. Fringe tidbit. In certain pre-Islamic rituals, poets would write lines onto leaves and float them down sacred streams, hoping the words would reach the spirit of a departed lover. The Abbasid poets, always enthusiastic about importing drama from every available culture, revived the tradition occasionally, especially when heartbreak and plumbing aligned. Back in the Eastern Wing, the girl from Samarkand steps into the marble bath, trailing her fingers along the edge. The steam curls upward, smelling faintly of cardamom, and something else, something floral, subtle. Not perfume. Memory. She doesn't look surprised when a single, damp petal sticks to her wrist. She peels it away, reads the smudged line. If I vanish from your scent, follow the water. She exhales, smiles. Not like someone won a prize, but like someone who just caught a whisper meant only for her. Later, she returns to the garden. Not with a letter, not with a performance. Just a bowl, a small porcelain bowl filled with water, floating in it 5 petals of her own, each one blank. You find it first, tucked beneath the stone bench where the prince often reads. He stares at the bowl in silence. They're empty, you say. He shakes his head. They're answers. You raise an eyebrow. She's saying, I heard you. I don't need to speak. I'm still here. He lifts one petal. It's soggy, translucent now, and besides, he adds, blank space is the most generous thing she's ever given me. Historians still debate the meaning of the cistern exchange if it happened at all. Some say it was a metaphor, others claim it was a known code between lovers in the palace, adopted later by courtiers who couldn't afford scandals but still wanted to be heard. A few records show palace servants catching petals in the laundry pools weeks afterward. Nobody ever found all the verses. Some are likely still drifting in the tunnels, in the bathwater, in the silence between words. The visiting sultan smells like horses' oranges and imminent conflict. He arrives with 20 riders, 60 gold-tasseled servants, and a portable chessboard made of ivory and lapis that requires its own guard. Officially, he's here to discuss trade routes and border clarifications. Unofficially, he's here to test the Caliph's son, because nothing says diplomatic tension like a friendly game with implied consequences. You're summoned before breakfast. You barely have time to lace your shoes before being dragged into a planning session in the prince's study where a map of the known world is curled up in the corner under an untouched breakfast tray. He wants a game, the prince says, pacing. Public, with an audience. You blink. Chess. He nods, and you know what that means. That he doesn't trust our grain tariffs. That he thinks I'm soft, that I write poems instead of policies. You glance at the chessboard. To be fair, you do write poems. He ignores that. If I lose, he'll leave with leverage. If I win, he'll suspect you had help. He stops pacing. Then you'll have to win. In a way that feels like losing, you suggest. He pauses. What does that even mean? You're the poet, you shrug. Figure it out. Mainstream historical fact. Chess, or shatranj, held a significant place in the Abbasid court. More than entertainment, it was a tool for diplomacy, strategy training, and ego measurement. Caliphs employed masters of the game not only to teach princes, but to intimidate foreign guests. Winning wasn't always the goal. How one won or didn't was what truly mattered. That evening, the garden is cleared for the match. Lamps flicker in the fig trees. Nobles gather with wine and fake interest. The Sultan lounges beneath a striped canopy, flanked by 2 bodyguards who look like they wrestle bears recreationally. The prince sits across from him, still as ink before the brush. You stand behind him, heart in your throat. The game begins. They open with mirrored defenses, classic diplomatic. But then the Sultan sacrifices a bishop early, bold, unexpected. The prince counters with a quiet pawn advance, signaling caution. The game turns slow, methodical, less a duel, more a conversation between 2 men who don't trust each other but respect the dance. Piece by piece, the board narrows. The crowd shifts in their seats. The air smells like orange blossoms and sweat. Halfway through, the Sultan leans in. You play like someone hiding something he says in a low voice. The prince smiles politely, only from people who ask. The Sultan chuckles. You've been writing verses lately, he adds. The prince doesn't reply. Dangerous, the Sultan says. Words are harder to defend than walls. Then it's a good thing I'm not building walls. A pause. Then the prince moves his rook. Check. Not checkmate. Just check, a reminder. And in 3 moves more, he tilts his king. Yields, the crowd murmurs. You lean forward, confused. You could have won, he nods. But then he'd know I wanted to. Fringe tidbit. There's a rumoured tradition in certain courts where princes deliberately lose ceremonial matches to demonstrate humility or to disguise strategic capabilities. The phrase "he fell like a king who knew the fall was part of the plan" became shorthand for this gesture. The Sultan rises, offers his hand, smiling but watching closely. You play well, he says. The prince bows, only against worthy opponents. Later, after the guests disperse and the wine pitchers are dry, you find him on the terrace with the girl from Samarkand. She's barefoot, perched on the stone railing like someone who was born to balance. You let him win, she says, sipping cooled tea. I needed him to underestimate me, he replies. She squints. Is that how you see me too? He pauses. No. You make me want to be transparent. She smirks. Terrible choice. Transparency is exhausting. You watch the match? She nods. From behind the pomegranate tree. The bishop move was reckless, so I've been told. She sets down her cup. Don't play me like a game. He looks at her, serious now. I wouldn't dare. She leans closer, not even for strategy, not even for peace. Historians still argue whether the prince's yielding in the match altered future negotiations. Some believe it bought months of border calm. Others say the Sultan later admitted in private that the prince unnerved him more with his softness than any army might have. Whatever the case, a new respect bloomed that night between 2 rulers and between 2 people who watched each other quietly, even across crowded gardens. And the girl from Samarkand. She left no verse that night. Only the echo of a bishop's fall and the scent of tea that never needed sweetening. At sunset, the palace seems to hold its breath, not in tension, but in that hush that arrives when a story tiptoes toward its next chapter. The gardens are mostly empty, save for one falcon wheeling lazily overhead, and a handful of servants collecting citrus blossoms before the wind can steal them. You're summoned to the astronomy tower, but not by the prince. She sends for you. The girl from Samarkand waits at the very top where the air is thin and the view stretches beyond the Tigris, past the palm groves all the way to the idea of something else. Freedom, maybe, or simply perspective. She's alone, seated cross-legged beside the great brass astrolabe parchment in her lap and saffron ink on her fingers. "I need you to take this to him," she says, without preamble. You approach slowly. Another letter. She shakes her head. A beginning or an ending? I haven't decided. The parchment is folded neatly, the ink still damp in a few places. You don't read it. Yet. But she looks at you with eyes like polished questions and says, "Promise you'll give it to him first." You nod. "I mean it," she adds. "No peeking." You raise your hands in surrender. "I'm too terrified of you to disobey." She almost smiles. Mainstream historical fact. Letters written in saffron ink were rare and costly. Used sparingly for poetry or declarations of deep intent marriage proposals, secret treaties or coded oaths, these golden words held both beauty and risk. The ink fades with time, but while it lingers it glows like captured sunlight. You carry the letter across the palace under the rising moon. He waits in his usual place beneath the olive tree, one sandal off, lost in a book he hasn't turned the page on in 20 minutes. She sent this, you say, offering the parchment like a relic. He takes it reverent, unfolds it, reads. And then for the first time in weeks he doesn't say anything. You wait, but the silence stretches. Well, you prompt. He hands it to you. Now you read. "My prince, you have given me metaphors when I needed time. You wrote gardens across stone falcons, across sky petals, down into silence. You saw me as a story, and for a while I became one. But I am not a story. I am a letter you do not get to edit. And yet, still I write. Because the words are ours now, not yours, not mine, just ours. If you still want to meet me at dawn, where the city ends, where the traders pass. Bring no poems, only a decision." You fold the letter carefully. The parchment still holds her warmth. "She's leaving, you ask?" "I don't know," he says, "but she's letting me find out." There's a fringe tidbit you recall. Now some Abbasid women wrote their final thoughts or requests in saffron, then folded them into prayer mats for a lover to find. It was believed that any decision made on a saffron letter carried spiritual weight, that it bound not just the moment, but the memory. You watch as he tucks the parchment into the inner fold of his robe. He doesn't run, he doesn't panic. Instead, he walks to the stables, orders a small horse, no attendants, no guards. He rides out as the stars bloom overhead, quiet, determined, still ink-stained at the cuffs, and you return to the tower. She's still there, still waiting. You sit beside her. "He's coming," you say. "I know," and together you watch the night do what it always does, fall slowly, completely, and without apology. Dawn rises slow and honey-coloured over the city's edge, painting the sandstone buildings in liquid gold. Out here, beyond the palace walls, the world wakes differently. No flutes, no perfumed baths, just the honest clatter of hooves, wheels, and vendors whose voices come laced with the smell of warm bread and coal smoke. The caravan is forming. Merchants shout to one another in Farsi Arabic and a little Greek. Camels groan in protest as baskets of dried apricots and bolts of indigo cloth are lashed to their flanks. A few early travelers sip mint tea from dented cups' eyes, scanning the horizon for danger or luck or both. You sit on a barrel near the caravan's edge, heart thudding quietly as you watch the girl from Samarkand. She's dressed for travel, nothing ornate, just deep blue cotton robes with a thin scarf wound around her head to keep the dust out. But even now she carries herself like someone unwilling to vanish, like someone who might leave but not be erased. She's not looking around for him, she just waits, hands folded, still, composed. And you wonder how many times has she done this before? Waited, left, waited again. A horse approaches, not a noble stallion, just a small grey one, practical, fast. And on it the prince, no guards, no fanfare. His cloak tied back, his expression unreadable. He dismounts a little too quickly, catching himself awkwardly on the saddle. You rise retreating behind a wagon to give them space, though you keep close enough to hear the first breath between them. She turns. Their eyes meet. No smile. No dramatic rush into arms. Just the heavy quiet of two people balancing between decisions. Mainstream historical fact. Though Abbasid royal men rarely travelled alone, especially outside the palace walls, there are recorded exceptions. Some princes, desperate to break protocol or pursue unofficial matters, disguised themselves or travelled in secret, trusting only one or two aides. These moments, though rare, often sparked controversy or poetry. "You came," she says softly. "You asked me to," he replies. "I didn't command you." He nods. "That's why I came." She studies him. "So, what now?" He looks past her toward the caravan, toward the road that snakes east through salt hills and desert winds, past cities with names that smell like cinnamon and sandalwood. "Are you leaving because of me?" he asks.
"I'm leaving because of me," she replies, "but I offered you a chance to meet me here, not to stop me, just to see if you would." He breathes in. "And if I ask you to stay, then I'll ask why you didn't come sooner." He nods. No protest, no pleading, only this. He reaches into his cloak and pulls out a scarf. Her scarf, the red one, with the single gold thread. He's kept it all this time, folded like a holy relic. He offers it to her now. She takes it, ties it to her belt without ceremony. Not a vow, not a promise, just an acknowledgement. Then she says, "I need to choose something for myself, maybe just for once." He nods again. "Will you write me?" She hesitates. "Maybe." Then after a beat, "If I have something to say." Fringe tidbit. There's a saying in a 10th century Baghdad love manual, yes, those existed, that a love that survives silence survives anything. It became a phrase, scratched into walls, embroidered on pillows, and whispered in partings.
No one knows who wrote it. But it lingers like unfinished letters. The camel master calls out, "Time to mount." The caravan stirs. She steps toward her waiting camel, climbs, gracefully settles. He watches. "You'll be safe?" he asks. "No," she says, "but I'll be real." She taps her mount gently. It begins to move. He doesn't follow. You return to his side. "She's gone," you say. "No," he murmurs, watching the road stretch endlessly toward the sun. "She's going." And then he adds, half to himself, "She didn't run. She chose." You start to say something, but he stops you. "I needed to see it," he says, "not to keep her, just to remember." The dust rises behind the caravan like smoke from a vanished campfire. No letters, no petals, just hoofbeats, and something unfinished floating behind them. 3 days later, just when the dust of her departure begins to settle into the folds of daily palace life, The falcon returns, not with ceremony, not even with speed. She lands softly on the edge of the olive tree where the prince usually sits, shaking out her wings as if the desert was just another mild inconvenience. Her feathers are slightly matted and she looks unimpressed with everything. But what catches your attention isn't the bird. It's the silk thread tied to her leg, red, just like the scarf, and beneath it carefully knotted a sliver of parchment. The prince is there in moments, too stunned to speak at first. He kneels before the bird like she's a messenger from a higher court, which in this case she kind of is. You help untie the thread, careful not to tug. The parchment is delicate, almost brittle from wind and sand, but intact. You hand it to him. He doesn't open it right away. He just holds it against his chest for a moment, eyes closed, breathing like someone who's just been handed back a heartbeat. Then slowly he reads, "Saba carried your silence well. Now carry mine. I am east of the salt hills. The sky is lower here, and the stars speak in smaller voices. I sleep near olive trees, not behind walls. I sing when I grind spices and no one interrupts. Don't follow, but know I flew. Mainstream historical fact. Falcons were trained in Abbasid courts not just for hunting, but for message delivery. Some were known to return across hundreds of miles guided by scents and landmarks. Messages tied beneath their wings were often written on parchment perfumed with ambergris or cardamom, familiar scents meant to guide the bird home. The prince reads the note again. Then again, he doesn't cry, doesn't laugh, but something inside him shifts. What does it mean, you ask quietly? He doesn't answer for a long time. Then it means she's living, a fringe tidbit. The phrase "carry my silence" appears in a fragment of a lesser-known Sufi poem from the 9th century. It was a request not for love, but for understanding without intrusion, for presence without pursuit. It's become a touchstone phrase for scholars dissecting the emotional intelligence of early courtly love. You sit beside him beneath the olive tree. She didn't say if she'll write again, you say? No, he replies. She said enough. He reaches for a reed pen. You blink, you're writing back? No, he says, just writing, and he begins. On fresh parchment, with no address, no title, just words spilling like water, finding its level. Some letters don't return, some letters become the road. The falcon flutters once, then leaps into the air, not toward her, just away. She circles the palace twice, then vanishes into the clouds like a line from a poem that never needed an ending. You both watch her go. She chose the wind, the prince murmurs. And she left it open, you add, he nods. She gave me an ending and a beginning. He finishes writing, folds the parchment and tucks it away. Not to send, just to keep. A private echo. Later that night, the wind carries the faintest scent of something unfamiliar, olive mint and saffron, not from the palace kitchen, from far east of the salt hills. And in that breeze, a letter you never received seems to whisper, I didn't leave the story, I just wrote my chapter elsewhere. The salt hills look like waves frozen mid-motion, bleached and cracked, rippling across the horizon like some ancient sea gave up and turned to dust. You've never seen them before, not this closely. But here you are, bouncing awkwardly on a camel that smells like dry raisins and seems personally offended by your existence. The prince rides beside you, wrapped in the nondescript robes of a merchant scribe, plain, travel-worn and completely unconvincing to anyone who's ever met a scribe who didn't quote a proverb every 10 steps. You're following a whisper, or a direction, Or maybe just a hunch born from her letter, and a feather the falcon dropped 3 days after its return. A long black quill tipped with dried saffron, too intentional to be coincidence. "She left it for me," he says, for the third time. "Yes," you mutter. "On purpose, so you wouldn't chase her." He nods solemnly. "Exactly," you pause. "Wait, so why are we chasing her?" She didn't say I couldn't pass through. Pass through what he gestures ahead. There it is, a caravanserai nestled at the base of a sun-bleached hill, its walls low and curved like a shrug. A rest stop for traders, pilgrims, and possibly poets in disguise. Mainstream historical fact. The Salt Hills outside the Abbasid capital were both barrier and passage. Tricky terrain dotted with ancient Zoroastrian ruins and forgotten wells. Caravans passed through here cautiously, often stopping for the night in half-crumbling roadside inns that promise shelter stories and slightly suspicious tea. You enter the caravanserai at dusk. There's a man selling spiced eggs, a woman brushing her horse with more tenderness than you've ever been shown by any living relative, and an old scholar arguing with a parrot, but no sign of her. The prince doesn't seem disappointed, he just breathes it in. "This is where she walked," he says. "I can feel it, unless it was her evil twin, you say, brushing dust off your boots. Or a decoy falcon, you know, just to test your poetic resolve." He doesn't laugh, just smiles faintly. You sleep on the roof that night, wrapped in a wool blanket under a sky so crowded with stars you feel like the moon should charge rent. At midnight you wake to the sound of a flute, low, slow, hesitant. The prince is already sitting up, alert, listening. "It's her," he says. "It could be anyone you whisper, or a goat." You both follow the sound. Around the bend of the caravan wall, past the well where someone's been drying figs on a cracked shield, you find a fire. Small, faint, flickering, and a woman sitting beside it. Not her, but she looks up as you approach and smiles. Looking for a girl who doesn't want to be found. You hesitate. The prince doesn't. "She told a story to a child here," the woman says, "paid for her bread in a riddle, left the scent of rosewater behind. That was 4 nights ago," he nods. "She's well," the woman adds, quieter than expected, but she left laughter behind that more than anything makes the prince close his eyes and breathe deep. He offers a coin. She refuses it. "Tell me a story instead," she says. Fringe tidbit. Some nomadic inns along the Silk Road refused payment from travellers who could entertain. A tale, a song, even a riddle considered fair exchange for bread and shelter. It was said that stories kept the desert honest. So the prince does. He sits beside the fire and tells the story of a falcon who thought she was a flame, and a prince who tried to catch the wind, and a girl who said nothing but sent silence tied with red thread. The woman listens. When it's over, she whispers, "You're not the end of her story." "I know," he replies. "I'm just a chapter she let live." You sleep better that night. The next day you leave the caravanserai, not chasing, not waiting, just walking. And in your satchel, the prince places a new letter, unsent, unsealed, blank, ready. You reach the ruins by midday, the air thick with the taste of old sun and powdered stone. The hills have given way to a stretch of cracked earth where pale columns rise like forgotten ribs from the sand. These are the bones of something older than either of you, a city once filled with fire and prayer, now reduced to whispers and dust. The Zoroastrian ruins. No guards, no pilgrims, just silence. The prince walks slowly, head bowed not in reverence, but in respect. Here even his poetry feels loud. You trail behind, brushing wind-blown grit from your cloak, watching as he steps between broken altars and toppled bricks, as if afraid his presence might break what time hasn't already. "She came here," he says softly. You're sure he kneels beside a pillar where someone's traced a symbol in charcoal, two intertwined flames, not a language. More like a message meant for no one, and someone. Mainstream historical fact. Zoroastrianism was once the dominant religion of Persia, and fire temples dotted the empire long before Islam rose, though many were abandoned or repurposed under Abbasid rule. Some ruins remained intact, regarded with curiosity and sometimes fear. Pilgrims came not for worship, but for questions. You both sit beneath the shade of a scorched fig tree. The roots creep between bricks like secrets. A lizard scuttles across a sun-warmed rock, pauses and disappears. "She stood here," he says again. You nod. She watched the horizon, he adds, not the past. Then he opens his satchel and pulls out a scroll. Not poetry this time. A map. Inked last night. The route east. Cities he's never seen, markets he's only read about, rivers whose names taste like cinnamon and salt when spoken aloud. She's making her own path, he murmurs. Good, you say. He turns to you. Do you think she'll wait for me? You pause. Do you want her to? He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he pulls out a small cloth bundle from the folds of his robe, unwraps it. Inside a stone, no carving, just a smooth flat river rock with a slash of red running through its center, almost like a wound. She left this in the well at the caravanserai, he says. Tied with black string. Fringe tidbit. In some Persian traditions, travellers left stones at crossroads or ruins marked with dye or charcoal to signal direction or emotion. Red often meant grief. Black meant finality. But a red-streaked stone tied with black, that was rarer. It meant, I hurt, but I continue. You watch him set the stone gently at the base of the cracked pillar. She didn't leave a letter, you say? She didn't need to, he replies. The wind picks up stirring sand and ash into little swirls. Somewhere nearby, something clinks, metal against stone. You rise to investigate and find a charm hanging from a thorn bush, a simple string looped through an old coin. The coin bears no insignia worn smooth by time, but someone has scratched a single line into the rim. Don't follow. Just remember, you hand it to him. He holds it for a long time. Then, with strange care, he ties it to his belt. Not as a claim, but as a reminder. You both walk among the ruins for a while longer, saying nothing, listening to the ghosts of a fire that no longer burns. As the sun begins to lower, casting long shadows between ancient stone, the prince does something unexpected. He takes out his writing board, but instead of composing a verse, he copies a name. Hers, not hidden in metaphor. Just her name. He doesn't recite it, doesn't decorate it. He simply writes it down and leaves the board at the foot of a toppled altar. A gesture without audience, a truth without embellishment. Later, as you mount your horses again, the ruins slip behind you, returning to silence. The only sign of your passing, a name written in black ink, and the faint scent of saffron on the wind. And somewhere, perhaps not so far away, a girl steps into the morning light of a new city, smiling faintly for no particular reason. The city of Gurgen is a tapestry unravelled at the edges, worn but colourful, full of corners that smell like cumin and sea air, where narrow alleys twist like rumours and the shopkeepers argue in poetry. You arrive late in the afternoon, and immediately you know she's not here. There's no trail, no marked stone, no falcon feather, lodged dramatically in a spice bin. Just noise, heat, and unfamiliarity. The prince doesn't seem disappointed. He walks through the market with his hands behind his back, like a student absorbing a new lesson. For once, he isn't looking for her. He's looking for the parts of the world she might have fallen in love with. The baker yelling out the price of sesame bread. The old woman braiding her granddaughter's hair. The musician playing a reed flute while also yelling at a donkey. You both end up in a tea shop tucked behind a dye market, its awning stitched together from mismatched silks. The tea is cheap and tastes like boiled questions, but the bench is shaded and there's a breeze that doesn't feel like it's judging your decisions. And that's where you meet her. Not her, but someone. She's serving the tea, older than the girl you've been chasing. Maybe 20 or 40. The sun makes guessing pointless. She moves with the practiced calm of someone who has handled both boiling water and bad customers without spilling either. She looks at the prince for just a moment too long. Not in recognition, but with the kind of interest that says you're out of place and I'm wondering if you know it. You've come far, she says. The prince nods. Too far, maybe. Not far enough if you're still chasing ghosts. He raises an eyebrow. Do I look like a man chasing ghosts? She smiles. You look like a man who thinks questions are better than answers. Mainstream historical fact. Gurgen, also called Yoryan, was a city on the northeastern edge of the Abbasid world, a borderland of cultures. It was famous for its blue-glazed ceramic silk trade and poets who rarely stayed longer than a season. Travelers passed through it like wind through a reed, leaving behind verses, debts, and sometimes children. You sip your tea, we're looking for someone, or signs of someone. She wore red, the woman asks too casually. The prince freezes, yes, and smelled like myrtle and smoke. He nods slowly. The woman shrugs. She left last week, didn't stay long. She was alone. A pause. She was smiling, not the answer he expected. She told a story to a boy who'd scraped his knee, said the world owed him at least one dragon and a cart full of dates. The prince smiles. That sounds like her. She also beat 2 men at chess. They did not take it well. That sounds even more like her. Fringe tidbit. In travellers' lodges of the Abbasid world, it was not uncommon for women, especially those travelling alone, to earn lodging by playing chess. It was considered an acceptable form of skill-based entertainment, and sometimes quite rebellion. She leave a message, you ask. The woman raises her eyebrows. She said if anyone followed her, they'd better have a better story than the one she left behind. Then after a moment she adds, but she also said, tell him I laughed. The prince closes his eyes. Thank you. She also left this, the woman says, reaching beneath the tea counter. A paper fan, folded, slightly worn. He opens it, slowly. One word written across the folds. Breathe, that's all. Not wait, not return, just breathe. The prince folds it again carefully. She knew we'd come here, you say. She knew I might try, he replies. And she knew when to stop walking. No, he says. She knew when I should stop. You finish your tea in silence. Outside the market swells with late-day colour. Children chase each other between carts. A camel sneezes into someone's laundry. A man with a broken lute sings a song about soup and heartbreak. She is not here. but her laughter lingers in the chessboard, the boy's heeled knee, the fold of the fan. And maybe that's enough. Maybe this time the trail ends, not in a reunion, but in someone else's story beginning. You return to the capital under skies the color of old coins, dusty gold just on the edge of tarnish. The road back is quiet, long, and oddly light. Not because the burden is gone, but because it's been laid down gently, like a robe, folded after prayer. The guards at the outer gate recognize the prince instantly. Of course they do. He never fully stopped looking like royalty, no matter how much dust he wore, or how many times he swore at camels under his breath. They don't ask questions. They just bow open the gates and pretend they don't notice the falcon feather tied to his belt. The palace hasn't changed, still grand, still filled with the sound of people pretending not to gossip. But somehow it feels smaller, not diminished, just less vast now that the horizon has been walked and the person who made it mysterious is elsewhere, writing her own verses into someone else's morning. You head straight to the olive tree. It's still there, still offering its stubborn little shade. He sits beneath it like he never left, pulls out his writing board. But he doesn't write. Not yet. You're not going to find her again, are you, you ask? He shakes his head. I'm not supposed to. Mainstream historical fact. In many Abbasid literary traditions, lovers who parted without tragedy but also without reunion were revered more deeply than those who stayed together. Their love was seen as too perfect, too sacred to be dirtied by resolution. The beauty is in the almost, as one poet wrote. Over the following weeks, the prince changes, but not loudly. He wakes earlier, speaks less, smiles more. He no longer writes about her. He writes from her, carrying the rhythm she left in his bones. His verses speak of salt hills, laughter that doesn't wait for permission, and falcons that know when to land. You notice the servants treat him differently now, not with more respect exactly, but with more certainty. As if he's shed the sheen of a dreamy boy and stepped into something solid. Not stern, just rooted. One morning the Caliph calls for him. You expect tension. Instead, the prince returns from the audience with a strange expression. He wants me to take a post in Basra, he says. You blink. Basra, that's practically the edge of the empire. He nods, which is why he offered it. You raise an eyebrow. Exile numb, an invitation to do something with what I've seen. A pause. And will you go? I think I must. Fringe tidbit Basra during the Abbasid Golden Age was not just a trading port, it was a center of science, philosophy, and political friction. Young nobles were often sent there under the guise of appointments to gain perspective or to be tested far from home. Before he leaves, he visits the library, not to read, but to place something on the shelf. You follow, of course. Nosiness is a responsibility at this point. It's a scroll, wrapped in red silk, untitled. What is it, you ask? A letter, he replies, not for her, for anyone. You glance at the shelf he chooses. It's nestled between treatises on astronomy and a very dramatic volume of herbal cures that once claimed boiled lentils could cure heartbreak. Someone will find it, he says, when they need to. Later on his last day in the capital, he sits with you one final time beneath the olive tree. She could be anywhere, you say. She is, he replies. She's in the way I think now, in what I let go of, in what I don't chase. You glance down. He's holding something. It's the paper fan, the one she left. He opens it again, reading that single word, breathe. And then gently, he lets the wind take it. The fan tumbles once, twice, then catches a current and sails over the wall, past the fig trees, past the courtyards, past the edge of everything mapped. Maybe someone else will find it, you murmur. Maybe someone else needs it, he replies, and together you watch it disappear, not as an ending, but as something left open. Basra greets you with heat and humming boats. The air carries the scent of brine and sugar fish oil and palm wine, mingling into a cocktail that refuses to be ignored. Narrow canals weave through the city like veins pulsing with activity. Traders yell in 5 languages, sailors sleep where they fall, and everywhere there are dates, piled high, dried, sticky, golden, or black as ink. The prince, no governor, now steps off the boat into this wild, honest chaos with eyes wide open. He's dressed plainly, no gold trim, no royal seals. Just the calm certainty of someone who's carried silence across deserts and returned with the patience of a man who no longer needs to prove anything. You follow close behind, swatting at what might be either mosquitoes or aggressive raisins with wings. Do they know who you are, you ask? I am the new tax reform, he replies dryly. They'll know soon enough. Mainstream historical fact. During the Abbasid period, Basra was both a cultural hub and a political minefield. As a key port city, it attracted philosophers, rebels, exiles, and dreamers. Governors were often chosen as a test of both leadership and restraint. It wasn't uncommon for them to be poets or scholars rather than hardened military men. The prince's first official act, not a tax, not a speech. He commissions a public bathhouse free to the elderly and children. The second act, a reading garden, small, tucked behind the mosque, but filled with cushions, shade, and a steady supply of tea. And the third, he declares that on the first Friday of every month, anyone rich or poor may tell a story. In the central square, provided it ends with a question. You raise an eyebrow at that one. Why a question, you ask? Because answers age. Questions stay hungry, he says. It spreads quickly word of the strange new governor who listens more than he speaks, who rides through the market alone, who once postponed a political negotiation to help an old man untangle a fishing net. Not everyone trusts it. Some suspect a ploy, some call it weakness, but some begin to write again, and you see the change. Slowly walls inked, with verses, boys practicing rhymes, between bread deliveries, girls sharing riddles over laundry buckets. And late at night you find him on the balcony reading old letters. Not hers, not anymore, his own. Letters he never sent, verses he never finished. The ones written for the idea of her now softened by time and sun. He's rewriting them. Not about her, with her voice threaded through. Fringe tidbit. In southern Basra there existed a secret society of echo poets, individuals who rewrote famous verses from the point of view of the person not named. Their goal wasn't satire, it was reclamation. They believed that behind every legendary lover was a silence that needed speaking. One morning a courier brings a gift, no letter, just a pouch of myrtle seeds wrapped in faded red silk, no name. But the prince understands. He plants them in the reading garden himself, quietly, gently, as if each seed is a breath he once held too long. You kneel beside him. She's not coming back, is she? He brushes soil from his fingers. She never said she would. A pause. And yet you murmur you built this place as if she might walk through it. No, he says. I built it as if someone might. He rises, brushing off his robes. She taught me that I don't need her return to justify her impact. You nod. That's very mature of you.
I'm terribly disappointing these days, he says with a smile, but you can see it in his eyes, not disappointment, peace. She became a question. He became an answer to something else. And somewhere in Basra, a child recites a new verse under a pomegranate tree. It begins with silence and ends with possibility. The first myrtle bloom arrives on a morning cloaked in sea fog. You don't notice it at first. It's small, delicate, pale pink with a whisper of green at the edges, peeking out between the reading garden's sun-warmed stones like it's unsure whether it's allowed to be here. The prince notices it, though. He doesn't say anything. He simply kneels, touches the petal with the back of his finger, and smiles like someone seeing an old friend from far away. "Do you think she knows you?" ask quietly. He glances up. That it bloomed, that it mattered, he considers. She didn't send a message. She sent a seed.
You both sit in silence after that, letting the city swirl around you call to prayer. In the distance, children running somewhere barefoot, the slow clunk of a merchant's cart filled with garlic and riddles. And beneath all of that, the single quiet fact, something grew. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Persia, myrtle was considered a symbol of both mourning and new life. Brides carried it for protection, mourners planted it to honor the departed, and mystics believed it could grow only where a deep truth had been spoken and heard. That day in Basra, 3 more people come to the reading garden than usual. One girl recites a poem she wrote about her father's fishing net. One boy sings a song about a goat who never learned to bleat. And an old man tells a story about his wife's laugh, how it sounded different in the rain. None of them say the word love, but it clings to everything like morning dew. The prince listens to them all, seated on a cushion near the myrtle bloom. At the end, he recites something of his own, not a poem, not quite. Just a line, a fragment. Somewhere, he says softly, a woman walks with her back to me, and I no longer follow because the path she cleared has become my own. There's no applause, only nods. And a boy who asks, "Did she love you?" The prince blinks, then answers, "She didn't ask me to wonder," fringe tidbit. There's a phrase carved into the underside of a ruined well in Samarkand believed to be part of an old riddle. The bird never lands, but the wind remembers her wings. Scholars argue about its origin. Some say it's code for a vanished poem. Others claim it's an abandoned metaphor from a traveling court scribe. Either way, it survived because someone needed it to. You watch as the prince rises from his cushion, brushes the dust from his robes, and returns to his office without another word. Later that week, he changes a policy: young girls may now apprentice in the city's scriptoriums. Another change tea is provided at the garden free. And a third, he commissions a small stage, not for performance, but for quiet recitations at dusk. He never says who inspired these things, but every now and then, when the sea fog rolls in, you find him standing beneath the olive tree that was imported from the capital. He says nothing, just waits until the first light breaks through. And in his hands sometimes is a folded fan. Not hers, a new one. Blank, because now the stories are being written, not to someone, but from someone who learned what it means to let go without forgetting. You ask him once when the garden is empty, would you take her back if she returned? He smiles slow and easy. I'd pour her tea, he says, and ask how her journey went, and that's all. No chase, no demand, just readiness. That evening, 2 more myrtle blooms open. The city, as always, doesn't notice, but the wind carries a scent, salt ink and something soft, something like memory in bloom. A year passes. The calendar turns quietly in Basra, marked less by official holidays and more by the rhythms of the reading garden. The city still bustles, still coughs up poets and pirates in equal measure, but beneath its noisy surface something soft has settled. A culture seeded in silence has taken root. The prince, your prince, has become a rumour, and children whisper that he once tamed a wild falcon by staring at it too long. Merchants claim he writes tax laws in couplets. A sailor swears the governor knows the true name of the moon but won't tell unless you beat him at chess. He doesn't correct any of them, he just listens and writes. You begin to notice something curious. The city is changing him just as surely as he changed it. His verses lean less on longing and more on observation. He writes about shadows cast by figs, laughter in echo chambers, and the strange way strangers remember your name only after you've forgotten theirs. One afternoon he receives a parcel. No name, no note. Just a small blue ceramic bowl, handmade imperfect. Inside it, 5 rose petals, dried and scentless. Your breath catches. Is it from her, you ask? He shrugs gently, tracing a finger along the rim. Maybe, but there's no message. There was, he says, it's just old now, mainstream historical fact. The art of communicating through objects rather than letters was common in many Islamic courts. A sprig of basil, a certain shade of thread, or a cracked bowl could speak volumes to those who knew the code. Some romances never exchanged a single written word, only tokens passed and read like scripture. Later that night he sets the bowl on a low shelf in the reading garden. Beneath it, a single note, even petals, fade with dignity. And that becomes a kind of proverb in the city. You hear it muttered over spilled wine, written in charcoal on staircases, even whispered by an old matchmaker as she hands off a loaf of sesame bread. Even petals fade with dignity. Fringe tidbit. In early Abbasid Basra, there were silent poets, individuals who communicated only through physical arrangements of objects in public spaces. A broken sandal next to a jasmine bloom might mean forgiveness. A spoon hung from a tree branch, confusion. It was art, and occasionally very inconvenient for the city's janitors. One evening, a girl stands in the reading garden after everyone's left. She's young, maybe 14, maybe 15. Her hands are stained with dye, her robes patched at the knees. She stands by the prince's cushion, not touching anything, just waiting. He approaches quietly. "You came to read," he asks. She shakes her head to return something. From her satchel she pulls out a scroll. Old, a bit crinkled at the edges. He frowns.
"Where did you get this?" "She gave it to my aunt," the girl says. "Told her to keep it until someone forgot her name." You step forward, startled. "She said that, she said, the day he no longer says my name out loud, give him this." The prince is silent, very still. Then he reaches for the scroll and opens it. No words. Just a charcoal sketch, a falcon in flight, a bowl of water, and a single flame drawn in red ink curled gently into the shape of a question mark. He smiles, then folds the scroll again. Not tightly, just enough. "What will you do with it, you ask?" "I'll frame it," he says. And he does. Places it above the garden gate. No label, no explanation. But everyone who passes beneath it feels something. A pause, a breath, a permission. That night, he tells a story in the square. It's about a woman who became a direction, who never needed a name to be remembered, who once taught a prince how to listen by refusing to answer.
It ends with a question, of course, and a quiet hush as the crowd breathes in something they can't quite name. But you know what it is. It's the scent of closure, myrtle, dust, and flame. The rains arrive like an apology long overdue. Basra becomes a city of puddles and reflections, everything mirrored, doubled, softened. Boats glide through swollen canals like drifting thoughts. The reading garden turns lush, almost wild. The myrtle bushes bloom without restraint, now their petals dropping like secrets onto the cushions below. You wake one morning to find the prince sitting barefoot in the damp earth, sleeves rolled up, coaxing a tiny turtle out of a puddle. He looks up and grins. He was stuck, he says. Didn't know he had options. You raise an eyebrow. That's not about the turtle, is it? He shrugs, not answering. You sit beside him watching as a myrtle bloom flutters into the puddle. The turtle ignores it, dignity intact. Later in the palace, a messenger arrives, a gift from Samara, a long wooden box. The prince opens it slowly, inside a mirror. Cracked, no note, just the object, just the silence. You both stare at it. Is that from her, you ask? He studies it, touches the cracked edge. It's for me, he says. That doesn't mean it's from her. Mainstream historical fact. Cracked mirrors in Abbasid symbolism often represented unresolved longing or transformation, a sign that beauty was not the goal, but perception. In one court, lovers exchanged flawed mirrors to say, I want you to see yourself the way I do, even in pieces. He sets the mirror in the corner of his writing chamber, not hidden, not displayed, just present. Days pass. You notice he begins sketching again. Not poems, drawings, figures walking away. Open hands, falcons in motion, never perched. He doesn't explain them. He doesn't have to. Fringe tidbit. There's a rare style of Abbasid court art known as iktifa, or vanishing line drawings, where subjects are rendered in such a way that they seem to be leaving the page. Some scholars argue it was invented by a court artist who fell in love with a woman who refused to be painted unless she could be disappearing. One evening, a woman arrives at the garden. Not her, but someone familiar. She wears a blue robe, carries a reed basket filled with dyed fabric, and speaks softly with the garden keeper. You recognize her eventually. She's the tea vendor's cousin, the one who once whispered she left laughter behind. Now she hands the prince a parcel, wrapped in silk, soft, weighted. I promised her I wouldn't tell you where she is, she says. He nods, doesn't press. She said you'd know what to do with this. He unwraps it. A scarf, red, frayed at the edges, torn near the middle, but stitched by hand in the corner, for when you forget how far you've come. He holds it gently, like a letter you read with your fingertips. Then, without a word, he folds it into his sash. He doesn't cry, but he does close his eyes, and you see something settle in him, not grief, not joy, just place. She is not returning, she is not watching, she is not waiting, and yet her presence remains here like perfume on old paper, like the aftertaste of saffron on a bowl no longer warm. That night he speaks in the garden again. He tells a new story, one where the prince does not chase the girl. He becomes the city that allows her freedom, the soil she never owed, the silence that understood her language. It ends not with a question this time, but with a sigh and a pause so deep even the rain seems to listen. You find the prince again under the olive tree, only now it's not the one from the capital. It's the one he had transplanted into the reading garden after the first rain's roots, gently cradled in clay and hope. A difficult journey, but worth it, he said, for a shade that remembers things. He sits in silence, an open scroll on his lap, the cracked mirror glinting behind him in the morning sun. The reflection is warped but kind, a little like how memory works. You take a seat beside him and watch as children chase each other between the rows of myrtle. One of them is humming, a tune you recognize but can't name. "I think I'm done writing about her," he says softly. You glance at the scroll. "Does that mean this is the last one?" "No," he smiles. "It means I can finally begin writing about other things." A pause, then like turtles and cracked mirrors and the smell of laundry on rooftops. "That's what's next." He laughs. "Why not every truth needs to wear red silk?" Mainstream historical fact. In later Abbasid years, a literary movement known as the Kafi, or the gentle obscured, emerged in Basra poets who favored understatement symbols and emotional restraint. Many credited its founding to an unnamed noble who once governed the city and wrote as if he was always listening to someone who had already left. That afternoon, a merchant arrives with a shipment of books from Nishapur, scientific texts, mystical writings, and a few banned love poems smuggled in between treatises on herbal medicine. The prince helps unload them himself. One volume catches his eye, The Geometry of Absence. You both leaf through it. It's full of diagrams with no labels, circles beside footprints, spirals next to flames, pages that suggest but never explain. He turns to the last page. It's blank. Then quietly he writes in the corner, "Let her absence shape your walls, not hollow them." You nod. Sounds like a proverb. Maybe it will be. He tucks the book onto a shelf between a text on astronomy and a guide to weaving. You step into the garden as the breeze picks up, carrying the smell of citrus from somewhere far off. The scarf in his sash flutters slightly. "Do you regret it?" you ask. Any of it, he doesn't answer immediately. Then no, she was never mine to lose. Just someone I got to meet. Fringe tidbit. Among travelling scholars in the Abbasid world, it was common to dedicate a poem not to a lover but to the moment shared with them. The idea was that affection lived in the instant, not the outcome. Some poems even began for the hour, not the woman. You hear the bell at the far gate ring once. A child enters the garden clutching a folded letter, not scented, not sealed. The child holds it out to you. "It's for the governor," she says. He receives it carefully, opens it, reads once, then folds it. "What did it say?" you ask. He smiles, eyes misty. It said, "I found a pomegranate tree that listens." You blink. "That's all, that's everything," he replies. That night he writes no poem, just plants another myrtle sapling. Silent. And maybe, just maybe, the wind that brushes past you as you leave the garden smells faintly of her. Or maybe it's just the season turning. But either way, you walk home smiling, not because the story is finished, but because you've stopped needing it to be. The sun rises slow and pale across the rooftops of Basra, casting soft gold over damp tiles and early vendor carts. In the reading garden, the first birds trill sleepily in the fig trees, and the cushions, faded now, a little worn at the corners, wait patiently for stories not yet told. The prince is already there. He no longer wears the formal robe of office except during council hours. Today he's in simple linen sleeves, rolled ink stained at the cuffs. He's bent over his writing board, not composing a poem or crafting an edict, but drafting a lesson plan. You raise an eyebrow as you approach. Teaching now, he grins. A few girls from the weaving quarter want to learn how to write riddles. Riddles, he shrugs. To start, wordplay is just wisdom wearing a smile. Mainstream historical fact. In many Abbasid cities, informal schools often grew from gardens, mosques, or markets. Learning was communal, less rigid than madrasa instruction, and often playful. Riddles, parables, and debates were standard methods, especially for the young or underprivileged. You settle beside him, watching as he sketches a question mark in the dust with a fig twig. What happened to the letters, you ask? The ones you wrote her. He looks up. I kept some, burned a few, gave one to a beggar who said he'd trade it for a better dream. And the scarf, he nods toward the tree. You follow his gaze. It's tied gently around a low branch of the olive tree, now faded from red to dusty rose. It flutters when the wind stirs, as if it might untie itself and drift off again. Do you still miss her? He thinks. Then no, I still carry her. But that's not the same. You pause. You never even said goodbye. She didn't want one? And now he smiles gently. Now I say hello to other things. Like the boy who reads aloud even though he stumbles. The widow who paints prayers onto cracked pottery. The sailor who once got drunk and recited every poem he'd ever memorized backwards. There is no shortage of hello. Fringe tidbit. In a little-known Basran folktale, a prince falls in love with a star. Every night he writes her letters and folds them into birds made of palm leaves. One night a real bird answers, carrying no letter, only a feather. He interprets it not as rejection but as invitation to learn silence. The scarf isn't the only thing in the tree. Someone's added a charm, a small wooden coin carved with the word maybe. And beside it, a child has tied a piece of blue ribbon. You smile. The garden is turning into a shrine. He chuckles. A shrine to what possibility, you say? Memory. People who chose themselves. He looks toward the horizon.
I wonder where she is now. Do you want to know? No, he says. I want her to stay free. Then he stands, dusts off his knees and rings the garden bell. A few children trickle in. The girl from the weaving quarter. The boy with the lisp. The baker's niece with a voice like birdsong. They gather around him as he begins. Today, he says, we're writing poems that end with silence. How do you write silence? One child asks. You leave space, he replies, and trust the reader will fill it. Later, he hangs their work along the garden walls, each poem incomplete by design. Invitations, not conclusions. As dusk falls, he takes one last walk along the garden's edge, where myrtle now grows thick and green. The olive tree rustles in the breeze, and the scarf still clinging to its branch gives the gentlest flutter like a hand waved not in parting, but in recognition. And you realize the story didn't end. It opened, it unfolded, it chose not to close.
Like a falcon in flight that never returns, not out of disdain, but because the sky was always meant to be wide. Evening comes draped in indigo, a quiet hush settling over Basra, as lanterns blink alive one by one, like stars rehearsing their cues. The scent of river water and roasted lentils fills the air, and the garden for once is empty. You find the prince alone at his writing table, the cushions stacked neatly, the tea cooling beside him untouched. He's not writing. He's holding something. The mirror, the cracked one. Tonight he studies it like it has something new to offer. The jagged line splitting its surface has faded into familiarity, a flaw no longer begging for correction, just belonging. She never wanted to be understood, he says softly. You don't reply. She wanted to be met, briefly, clearly, without possession. He sets the mirror down and exhales. Then from a hidden drawer he pulls out a bundle wrapped in soft cloth, cream-coloured, edged with green thread. He opens it slowly. Inside one final scroll, unmarked, no seal. But you recognise the careful folding, her style. He glances at you. She left it with the spice seller in Gurgen. For the day I stopped waiting. You nod, uncertain whether to stay or turn away. He opens it. You watch his eyes move left to right, slowly, then back again. Then he closes it and does something you didn't expect. He hands it to you. You hesitate. She said it was for me, you say. No, he replies. She said it was for the one who would remember her honestly. You read. If you're reading this, it means you stop standing still. Good. The wind never loved statues. I didn't leave you behind. I moved forward because stillness was never my nature. And deep down it was never yours either. I kept the garden in my bones, the red scarf in my pack.
And your laughter, your real laughter, the kind that snorts a little at the end, that stayed with me longer than any verse. If we meet again, I hope it's because we were both already full, not seeking to be filled. I hope you love someone who runs beside you, not someone you chase. And I hope you write about something that frightens you, then live it. I'll be the breeze that shifts the ink. You finish reading. Silence falls, the kind that doesn't ache, just rests. Mainstream historical fact. Many women in Abbasid culture, especially educated travellers, left behind what were called closing leaves, farewell letters that contained instructions, memories, or even playful challenges. These were typically left without certainty they'd be found, but with the belief that if they were, it would be at the right time. She gave you her end, you murmur. He shakes his head. She gave me my beginning.
Fringe tidbit. There are legends of a wandering poetess whose verses travelled farther than she did. Scholars debate whether she existed or whether her name was merely a stand-in for love itself. Her symbol, a falcon with one wing dipped in red dye. That night he writes again. Not on parchment. On the wall of the garden itself in soft charcoal. I was not her home. I was the wind she pushed off from. The ink smudges in places, but he doesn't correct it. You light the lanterns one by one, and as darkness melts into shadow gold, the garden feels more alive than it ever did, filled with people. You feel her here, not as a ghost, as a truth that didn't need to stay to remain real. And when the last light flickers, he speaks without turning. Tomorrow I'll appoint a successor. Leave the city, head north, maybe east, to find her. No, he says. To find me, the one she showed me how to become. You leave him to the lanterns and the wind, and behind you the garden breathes, not a tomb, a threshold. The road stretches out before you, a ribbon of dust and possibility bordered by whispering reeds and the occasional olive tree bowed with age. The prince, no longer tethered by title, rides at your side. His horse walks slow, deliberate, as though it too understands the weight of this moment. He wears no seal, no royal ring, only a weathered sash and the red scarf tucked neatly at his belt. There is no destination, just a direction, just a sky that seems to approve. You travel lightly, a few scrolls, some dried fruit water in a goatskin pouch. The prince hums, sometimes not a song you know, something improvised, maybe something she once sang under her breath while stoking a fire. She is everywhere now and nowhere at all. You pass a group of pilgrims travelling the opposite way. One carries a book of riddles. Another carries nothing but a flute. The third, a girl no older than 15, stops and bows slightly to the prince. "You are the man who built the garden?" she asks. He smiles. "No, the garden built itself. I just made space." She nods, as if she understands, and offers him a pressed flower myrtle, of course, before continuing on. Later you camp beneath a fig tree and eat in silence. The night wraps around you slowly, softly. He writes a few lines in the dirt. "Let go the story that ended too soon. Begin the one that ends in breath." No one speaks, because really, what more is there? Mainstream historical fact: Abbasid poets often wandered after stepping down from positions of power, choosing the life of scholar travelers. Their legacies were preserved not in statues or coins, but in gardens, verses, and children who remembered their names long after the cities forgot. He builds no monuments, leaves no trail, just passes through towns and valleys, offering stories, listening to riddles, planting one tree in each place. He stays longer than a night. And in one quiet village nestled between riverbanks and silence, you find the thing you didn't realize you were still looking for. A library, small, handmade shelves, no index. But among its volumes, tucked between a book of sea chants and a treatise on falcon behavior, is a scroll, unlabeled, familiar handwriting. It begins, "If you're reading this, it means you stopped waiting and started walking." She's been here. No forwarding address. No lingering perfume. Just the echo of someone who never needed to be found, to be felt. The prince touches the scroll briefly, then sets it back. "She never wanted me to follow," he says. And now at last he truly doesn't. You sleep that night beside a low fire. The scarf makes a fine pillow. The myrtle flower lies between two stones, catching moonlight like a secret. And the wind hums something that feels like a blessing. A story that never needed to end, only to unfold far enough to let the rest of your life begin. And now, as the final myrtle bloom fades from your memory and the garden closes gently behind you, let the last echoes of this story settle in your chest like evening dew. You have walked deserts and palaces, chased letters across cities, and listened as silence spoke louder than words ever could. You followed the footsteps of a prince who learned not to possess but to release, not to hold on but to honor. Her absence did not break him, it became his teacher. And perhaps there's a lesson for you too here at the edge of sleep, one not written in ink or carved in stone, but whispered in the spaces between. Not every story ends in reunion. Some end in freedom, in gardens built from memory, in verses that don't rhyme but still feel whole. So breathe now, let go of the chase. Let the stillness settle into your limbs. The wind will carry the rest. There is nothing more to find tonight. No next page, no final twist. Only this moment, soft and unhurried. You're safe, you're still. And somewhere out beyond the reach of maps she walks on, not waiting to be followed, only wishing you peace. Sweet dreams, end of script, sweet dreams.